or the ill.
tués par des
They have been
bombardements
killed by
qui
shelling,
n'épargnent ni
which
les
does not
hôpitaux,
spare
ni les
hospitals,
écoles,
aid
ni les
distribution
centres de
centers,
distribution d'aide,
schools,
ni les personnes de l'ONU,
UN staff,
ni les
or
journalistes.
journalists.
Les crimes perpétrés
The
contre
crimes
la Palestine
perpetrated against
révèlent
Palestine
une contradiction insoutenable.
stem from
En
an
effet,
untenable
comment
contradiction.
un gouvernement
Indeed, how
issu d'un
can a
peuple
government
qui a
elected
été
by a
victime de
people who were
l'Holocauste
victim of the
peut-il commettre
Holocaust,
un génocide
how can they
aux yeux
commit a
aussi du monde
genocide
entier
before the very eyes of
et
the
imposer
entire
aujourd'hui
world
à d'autres
and
des
inflict
traumatismes
similar
semblables
trauma on
de la
others
guerre,
today?
de l'exil
War,
et de
exile,
l'oppression?
and oppression.
Comment Israël
How can Israel,
peut-il de surcroît
in
s'en
addition,
prendre
take
à
it out
tous
on
et être en
everyone
conflit meurtrier
else,
avec tous ses voisins?
entering into deadly
Comme le
conflict with
rappelle
all of
le
its
adage,
neighbors?
on
As
ne
the old
choisit
adage
pas son
goes, we
voisin
don't choose our
et on
neighbors,
doit vivre
but we
en
have
paix,
to
en
live in
sécurité
peace and
avec eux.
security with them.
Ainsi, nous ne
Thus,
pouvons que saluer
we
le
must
courage
welcome
et l'humanisme
and the courage and the
des frères
humanity
israéliens,
of
des
the
amis israéliens
Israelis,
qui élèvent leur
friends from
voix
Israel
contre
who are
cette
raising their
barbarie.
voices against this
Bravo
barbarity.
et merci à
Bravo
vous, chers
and
amis.
thank you to you, dear
Et comme
friends.
l'histoire nous
And
rappelle,
as history reminds us,
devant la tragédie de
when we look
l'Holocauste,
at the tragedy of the
les
Holocaust,
pays arabes,
Arab,
africains et
African
musulmans
and Muslim
n'ont jamais
countries have
été du
never
côté
been on the
des
side
génocidaires.
of
Au
the
contraire,
perpetrators of
nos
genocide. On the
aïeux et nos
contrary, our
ancêtres
forefathers and our
ont,
ancestors
au
were
péril de leur vie,
risking their
combattu aux
lives.
côtés
They
des alliés
fought
pour
alongside the
défendre
Allies
le
to
peuple
defend
juif
the Jewish
et
people
les accueillir
and host
et les
them,
rescapés dans leur pays.
welcome the survivors into
Madame
their
la Présidente,
countries.
l'Union des Comores,
President of
fidèle
the
à
Union
ses
of
principes,
Commerce,
en
loyal as it is
respect
to
du
its
droit
principles
international,
and
réaffirme son
respecting
soutien
international law,
indéfectible
reaffirms
à
its
la
tireless
solution à deux
support
États
to the two-state
vivant
solution,
côte à côte
living side by
avec
side,
Jérusalem-Est
with East
comme
Jerusalem
capitale
as
de
the
l'État de
capital of the
Palestine,
state of Palestine,
seule solution pour
which
la
is the
paix et la
only
sécurité
solution for
pour
peace and
Israël
security
et
for
pour toute
Israel
la
and for the
région du
entire
Proche et du
Near
Moyen-Orient.
and Middle East region.
Contrairement à l'argumentaire
Unlike the
selon
argument put
lequel
forward,
reconnaître l'État de
whereby
Palestine,
recognizing the state of
c'est faire un
Palestine
cadeau à Hamas,
is a gift to
avoir un État
Hamas,
palestinien
having a
reconnu
Palestine state that is
permettra
recognized
aux
would allow
Palestiniens de se
Palestinian
conformer,
people
d'accomplir
to
leurs devoirs aux
accomplish their
obligations et aux
duties
droits
and
internationaux.
obligations under
Cela
international
constitue
law. This
un meilleur gage de
is the
paix
best gauge
plutôt
of
que
establishing
d'avoir
peace,
des
rather
groupes
than having
comme interlocuteurs.
groups as
Nous saluons
interlocutors and
ainsi
negotiators.
la
Thus,
décision
we
historique de
welcome the
la
historic
France
decision taken by
et nous
France,
rendons
and we
hommage
pay
au
tribute
président
here to
Macron,
President Macron,
aux dirigeants
and
de
also to
nombreux
the
pays
leaders of many
qui ont
other
reconnu
countries,
lundi 23
who,
septembre
on Monday
dernier
the
l'État de
23rd of
Palestine
September, recognized the
depuis
state of
cette tribune de
Palestine
l'ONU.
at this UN
Nous nous
rostrum.
réjouissons de cette heureuse initiative
We welcome
qui
this positive
intervient à la
initiative,
suite
which
de la
comes
déclaration de New
following the
York
New York
adoptée
Declaration, which was
ce même mois de
adopted
septembre
also in
par une
September
auguste Assemblée
by
générale
the General
et
Assembly.
dans le droit fil
In a
de celle de la
continuation of
conférence
this international
internationale
conference
organisée à nous donner
organized in
par la
August by
France et l'Arabie
France and Saudi
Saoudite
Arabia
sous l'égide des
under
Nations
the
Unies.
aegis of the United Nations.
Nous appelons cette Assemblée
We call on this
à
assembly
inscrire de façon irréversible
to put
l'avenir
the
de l'État
future of
palestinien
the
au
Palestinian
cœur de notre
state
agenda
once and
commun.
for all on
Il
our
est de
common
notre
agenda.
responsabilité morale et
It is
physique
our
d'agir
moral
car chaque jour qui
responsibility to
passe
act, because
sans
with every day
action
that goes by
entraîne
without
la
action
mort
being
de
taken,
milliers innocents,
thousands of
femmes et enfants.
innocent people, women and
Personne ne pourra
children
plus
die.
dire je ne savais
No
pas.
one will be able to
L'histoire est un
say
juge
anymore, I
implacable,
didn't know.
incorruptible,
History will
qui
be
ne
our
pardonnera
judge.
ni le silence,
It will not
ni
forgive
l'action, ni
silence nor
l'inaction.
inaction.
Pensons aux futures
Let us think of
générations
the future
pour que
generations
demain, ils
so
soient
that
fiers
tomorrow
de nos actions.
they could be proud of what
Madame la
we did.
Présidente, la paix et le
President,
développement ne sauraient
peace and
construire
development
sans
can
justice
only
et
be
sans
built,
inclusion.
cannot be
Et c'est
built without
pourquoi,
justice and inclusion. That is
65 ans
why,
après les
65
indépendances,
years
l'Afrique,
after a wave
continent
of independence,
de
Africa
près de
is a
2 milliards
continent
d'habitants,
of more than 2
doit
billion
obtenir
people.
sa place légitime
Now
au
Africa
sein du
must
Conseil de sécurité
finally
des Nations
obtain
Unies.
its legitimate rightful
La
place
vision
within the
de l'Union
Security
africaine,
Council of the United
une
Nations. The
Afrique
vision
unie,
of the African Union, a
prospère,
united, prosperous,
pacifique et actrice
peaceful
de son
Africa
destin,
that is master of its
rejoint
own fate,
pleinement l'esprit de cette
is
session.
fully echoes the spirit
Durant ma
of this
présidence de l'Union
session.
africaine,
During my
j'ai fait de
presidency
la
of the African
résolution des
Union,
conflits
I
et de la médiation
prioritized
une
conflict
priorité
resolution and
afin de
mediation
concrétiser l'ambition
to
de faire taire les armes.
once and for all
Projet phare
silence
de
the
l'Union africaine
guns.
dans le
This is
cadre de
a
l'agenda
flagship initiative of the
2063,
African Union as part of the
l'Afrique que nous
2063
voulons
agenda, the
est
Africa we want,
conformément aux normes
and it
et
is in line
principes
with the norms and
du
principles
protocole
and
de l'Union
protocols
africaine
of the African
relatif à la
Union
réaction du
regarding
Conseil de paix et de
the
sécurité de l'Union
African
africaine.
Peace and Security
Cet
Council.
engagement est la clé
This
de la
commitment
mise en œuvre
is
effective
the
de
key
la
for
zone de
the
libre-échange
effective
continentale
implementation of the African
africaine,
Free Trade Area,
pilier d'une Afrique forte
which
dans
itself
le
is a
concert des
pillar
nations.
for
la
a
Présidente,
strong Africa
honorable
within the
assistant,
concert of nations.
dans la même dynamique,
President, distinguished
je tiens
guests,
à
in the
rappeler
same vein, I wish
que
to
la
recall
déclaration adoptée
that
par
the
l'Assemblée
declaration
générale
adopted by the
à sa
General
26e
Assembly at its
session
26th
a fait de
session
l'océan Indien une zone de paix
declared the Indian
exempte
Ocean a
d'armes
zone of
nucléaires
peace,
et de
free
bases
from nuclear
militaires.
weapons
Or,
and
aujourd'hui
military
encore,
bases. However,
des
still
ambitions
today,
contraires
competing
menacent cette
ambitions
stabilité.
are threatening this
Je dénonce
stability.
ainsi avec
Thus,
fermeté
I strongly
tout projet
condemn
d'installer
and
une
denounce
base navale
any
militaire à
project
Mayotte,
to install
île
a
comorienne,
military
qui reste
base in Mayotte,
malheureusement
a Comorian
toujours sous
island, which
administration française.
unfortunately is still under French
L'Union des
administration.
Comores,
The
qui
Union
vient
of the
de
Comoros,
célébrer
who's
le
they were
cinquantenaire de
just
son indépendance
celebrated 50
et de
years
son
of
admission aux Nations
independence and
Unies,
accession to the United
reste
Nations.
attaché
We
au
remain
recouvrement
committed
intégral
to the
de son territoire
full
national
entirety of our
en
national
Juan,
territory,
Grande Comore,
Anjouan, Grand
Moélie et
Comore,
Mayotte.
Moélie, and Mayotte, all of
Je
it.
tiens à
I
renouveler
wish to
la
reiterate
gratitude du
the
peuple
gratitude
et
of the
du
people and the
gouvernement
government
comorien
of the
à toutes
Comoros, to
celles et
all
tous
of
ceux qui
those
nous ont,
who,
à
as we
l'occasion
mark
de
this
ce
half
cinquantenaire,
century
adressé leurs félicitations
anniversary,
et leurs vœux.
have
Et
congratulated
dans
us
ce
and sent their
contexte
best
du haut de
wishes.
cette
In this
tribune,
context, from
je ne
this
peux passer sous
rostrum, I
silence
cannot
la question de
also
Mayotte,
ignore the question of
île
Mayotte,
comorienne,
a
toujours
Comorian island which
sous
is
occupation
still under
française,
French occupation,
malgré les options claires et
despite
répétées
clear and
de
repeated
l'ONU, entre autres,
resolutions of
de
the
l'Union
UN,
africaine
of the
et
African
de la
Union,
CARAB et d'autres
and
structures.
from other
Le dialogue
bodies too.
engagé avec la
The
France,
dialogue that has begun
tout ce
with
que feu le
France,
président Mitterrand a
what the
appelé à
late President
qualifier
Mitterrand
de
called
contentieux
an
désagréable,
unfortunate
doit
dispute,
aboutir,
must
car
reach a
ces
successful
différends
conclusion,
qui n'a
because
fait
this
trop
dispute has
durer
gone on far too
coûtent
long,
chaque année
and
la
every
vie à
year
des
it
milliers de
costs the
nos compatriotes.
lives of thousands of our
Dans le bord de mer
compatriots in the stretch
séparant
of sea
Mayotte
that
et les
separates
autres îles
Mayotte
sœurs.
and its
Cette
sister
semaine encore,
islands.
des faits
This
d'une
week,
extrême gravité
very
ont été
serious
révélés
facts were
par une
unveiled
enquête
by
du
an
journal Le Monde
investigation
français
from the French
qui fait
newspaper Le
état de
Monde,
manœuvres
which
délibérées
reported on
de la
deliberate
police
maneuvers on the
opérant à
part
Mayotte
of the police
qui
operating
conduisent
in Mayotte,
régulièrement au naufrage
carrying out
d'embarcations
regularly
provoquent la
sinking
mort
boats,
de
which cost
plusieurs
the
ressortissants
lives
comoriens.
of several
Ainsi, l'Union des
Comorian
Comores
citizens. Thus,
appelle
the
à
Union of the
l'État
Comoros
français,
calls on the French
puissance
state,
occupante,
the occupying
à faire
power,
arrêter ces
to
opérations,
stop these
à
operations,
diligenter les enquêtes
to
appropriées
launch the
et
appropriate
à sanctionner
investigations, and
les
to
auteurs de cette barbarie
punish the
pour que justice
perpetrators
soit
of this
faite et pour que
barbarity,
la
so that justice
dignité
be served
des vies humaines
and so that the
soit
dignity of
respectée.
human lives be respected.
Pour sa part, l'Union des
On our
Comores
side, the Union of the Comoros
poursuivra
will
sans relâche
tirelessly
son
continue
action diplomatique et
its
juridique
diplomatic and
afin que
legal action,
justice soit rendue
so that justice
et
can
pour
be
que
served,
juste
and so that a
soit
just
trouvé
solution can be
à la
found
question
to
de
the
l'île comorienne de Mayotte
question of
qui
the
constitue
Comorian
l'une
island
des
of
dernières
Mayotte,
blessures
which
diverses
cause
aujourd'hui
are today
et prennent des
prevaricating
initiatives
and
malheureuses
undertaking
avec la
unfortunate
France
initiatives with
pour
France
établir des
to
relations
establish
avec
relations
Mayotte
with Mayotte
au
in
mépris du droit
spite of
international
our
et de notre
of
souveraineté nationale.
international law and
Nous
our
appelons l'Union
national
africaine
sovereignty,
à
as we
agir
call an African Union,
pour
to act,
rappeler le devoir et la
to
nécessité
recall the
du
duty and
respect du droit
necessity for the
international,
respect of
de
international law
l'unité de notre
and the
archipel.
respect for unity of our
Madame la
archipelago.
Présidence, honorable assistance,
President, distinguished
comme beaucoup de
guests.
petits États
As many,
insulaires en
much
développement,
like many small island
les
developing
Comores sont en
states,
première
Comoros
ligne
are on the front line
face au changement
of
climatique
climate change,
et restent un pays
and we remain a
vulnérable
vulnerable but
mais déterminé.
determined
La
country.
montée des eaux, les régions
Rising
côtières
seas, coastal
et la
erosion,
fréquence accrue
and
des
the
cyclones
increased frequency of
menacent nos
cyclones
villages,
are
nos
posing a threat to
écosystèmes
our villages,
et nos vies.
our ecosystems, and
Nous
our
appelons à un
lives.
accès
We
équitable
call
et
for
simplifié
equitable and
au
simplified
financement
access to
climatique,
climate
à une
financing.
solidarité
We
accrue
call for
pour
increased
que nos
solidarity
populations
too, so that our
puissent
people
non seulement
can not
survivre,
only
mais
survive
prospérer.
but prosper.
Ces dernières années,
In
l'Union
recent
des
years,
Comores a engagé
the
un
Union of the
plan
Comoros has
convergent
launched
d'ici
a
2030
emerging
qui
Comoros
vise
plan,
à transformer notre
which
économie,
seeks to transform
renforcer
our economy,
nos infrastructures,
strengthen our infrastructure,
moderniser notre
modernize our
éducation
education
et
system, and
améliorer
improve
la
our
santé de
people's
nos
health.
populations. Notre pays
Our
dispose
country
d'immenses
has
potentialités,
a
entre
vast
autres,
potential
en matière d'énergie
in terms of
renouvelable,
renewable
dont la
energy,
géothermie.
including geothermal energy.
Nous invitons nos
We
partenaires,
invite our
bi et multilatéraux,
bilateral and
et le
multilateral
secteur privé,
partners and the
le secteur
private
privé,
sector
de se joindre à nos
to
projets de
join
développement moteurs
this promising
d'avenir
development
fondés sur
project.
3 axes,
It
la
is
croissance
based on
inclusive,
3 pillars:
la
inclusive
transition
growth,
énergétique et
the
numérique,
energy and digital
l'économie
transition,
bleue,
the blue and
qui
the blue economy,
constitue une des richesses de l'océan Indien.
one of the great
La
riches,
sécurité
which is
dans
the
cette
Indian
région
Ocean. The
dépend de la
security across that
stabilité de
region
chacun de ces
depends
États.
on the stability
Et
of
nous
each and every one of
condamnons
its states,
ainsi
and thus we
avec
condemn
rigueur toutes les formes
strongly
de
all
terrorisme
forms of
et de
terrorism
criminalité
and
transnationale.
transnational
Nous
crime.
plaidons pour
We
un
advocate for
multilatéralisme fort,
strong
juste et
and just
solidaire, fondé
multilateralism
sur
and
la Charte des Nations
solidarity
Unies et le
based on the UN
respect
Charter
de l'égalité
and the respect for the
souveraine
sovereign
des
equality
États.
of states.
Nous devons réaffirmer
We must
notre
reaffirm
engagement
also
en
our
faveur
commitment
d'un
to
ordre mondial
a
plus
fairer
équitable,
world
où les
order,
petits États ont
where
voix au
small
chapitre
states
et
have
participent
a
pleinement
voice and can
à la
fully
gouvernance mondiale.
participate in
Et
global
pour
governance,
enrayer les
and
dérives
to turn back
du
the
protectionnisme
tide of
et du repli
protectionism
sur soi, nous
and
sommes
stop
partisans
people looking
des
inward.
réformes
We
de l'architecture
advocate for
financière
reform
internationale.
of the international
Après la
financial
pandémie de
architecture.
COVID-19, la crise
Following the
climatique
COVID-19
et
pandemic,
l'endettement croissant des
the
pays en
climate
développement,
crisis and the
il est
increasing debt
impératif
of
d'adapter le
developing
système
countries,
financier
it is
mondial
crucial to
aux
adapt the
réalités
global financial
économiques,
system to
géopolitiques et
the
sociales.
economic,
50
geopolitical, and
ans
social
après la
realities.
proclamation de son
50
indépendance,
years after its
la nation comore
independence,
est encore jeune,
the Comorian
mais
nation is still a
forte
young one,
de
but
son
it is buoyed
expérience et
by
de
its
ses rêves.
experience and by
Le
its
peuple
dreams.
comorien,
The
fier
Comorian people
de son histoire et
are
confiant en
proud
son avenir,
of its history and
reste
confident in
attaché
its
à cette assemblée
future, and
qui
they remain
incarne nos
committed to this
aspirations
assembly,
communes
which embodies our
à la
common
paix,
aspirations
à
for
la
peace,
justice,
justice,
au
and
développement,
development,
qui doivent sans
which
cesse être
must be
consolidées.
consistently
J'appelle donc solennellement
consolidated.
la communauté
I therefore
internationale
solemnly
et nos
appeal to the
partenaires au
international
développement
community
à
and our
accompagner
development
nos
partners
efforts
to support our
comme gage d'un
efforts
monde véritablement
so that
au
we can have
service
a
de la
world that
paix,
really
du
is for
développement
peace,
et des droits
development,
humains.
and human
Je vous
rights.
remercie de
Thank
votre
you for
aimable
your
attention.
kind attention.
Au nom de l'Assemblée, je remercie
On
le
behalf
président
of
de
the
l'Union des
Assembly, I
Comores.
wish to thank the President of the Union of the Comoros.
L'Assemblée va maintenant entendre
The
l'allocution
Assembly will
de
now
Son
hear
Excellence
an
Madame
address by Her
Netumbo Nandi
Excellency
Nekwa,
Ms. Netumbo
Présidente de la
Nandi
République
Ndaitwah,
de
President
Namibie.
of the Republic of Namibia.
Je prie le protocole de
I
bien
request
vouloir
protocol
accompagner
to
Son
escort
Excellence.
Her
Je
Excellency
l'invite à prendre la
and
parole
invite her to
devant
address the
l'Assemblée.
Assembly.
Thank you, Madam President. When the founders of the UN convened 8 years ago, they did so to establish an organization, among others, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, dignity of human person, and equal rights of men and women, and of nations, large and small, and to lay the groundwork for a durable system that promotes justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and international laws. While over the following decades, we have become closer to the brink of war, the United Nations has stood the test of time, from decolonization to promoting the right to self-determination, from conflict prevention and securing peace to the provision of humanitarian assistance. The UN has continued to fulfill its founding mandate under very difficult circumstances. Therefore, the international community must honor the brave men and women who, under the blue flag, have been at the forefront in the securing of world peace. Namibia's journey to independence is one of the UN's most successful stories. It was through this very organization that our forebears tirelessly petitioned for the end of apartheid, colonial rule in Namibia, for freedom and independence of our country. At this point, I want to thank the UN family for having held a special session in remembrance of our founding president, Comrade Sam Safishuna Nuyoma, when he passed on. Madam President, my personal journey with the United Nations begins in 1974, where I have had the privilege to serve my country and Africa in various capacities within the halls of this distinguished global organ. Today, I am deeply honored and humbled to stand before you as the 5th President of the Republic of Namibia with a mandate to deliver services and to ensure justice of all inhabitants of our country. As a woman, I encourage every girl and woman by affirming that your voice matters. Your vision is needed, as it will pave you a way to the helm of whatever institution you are serving. Madam President, Namibia's 8th administration is built on the strong foundation and legacy of our predecessors. Under the theme, Unity in Diversity, Natural Resources Beneficiation, and Youth Empowerment for Sustainable Development. That theme aims to shape and transform the Namibian economy through value addition and other economic activities. Hence, we have identified agriculture, sports, youth empowerment, education and training, creative industry, health services, land and housing as critical sectors supported by mining, energy, water, tourism, infrastructure development, transport, logistics, to sustain our economic development through our long-term development blueprint, Vision 2030. This vision is being implemented through a series of national development plans, NDPs. Recently, we launched the 6th NDP with its fundamental pillars clearly aligned to the global agenda, such as the SADC Regional Inductive Strategic Development Plan, the African Union Agenda 2063, and the UN Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. Some of our achievements include the launch and the operationalization of the National Youth Fund, which is to assist young entrepreneurs in their economic activities. In the area of education, we will abolish registration and tuition fees in all public institutions of higher learning and vocational training centers to ensure skill development. On energy, Namibia is diversifying her energy mix using all our natural resources. In addition, Namibia presented her energy compact at the African Energy Forum, thus enabling us to access concessional funding for national energy initiatives. Madam President, climate change is scorching our lands and drying up our rivers. Global instability is impacting our economies, our markets, and jeopardizing our livelihood. These are interconnected symptoms of deeper fragility in our shared system. They require our collective action rooted in apathy and shared responsibility. In this regard, I am glad to announce Namibia's bid to host the Africa Regional Hub of the Green Climate Fund. Furthermore, severe droughts, floods, and other climatics brought about by climate change cannot be overemphasized. Namibia calls for the implementation of the provision of the Namib Declaration on a strong United Nations Convention to combat desertification, for a land degradation and neutral world. Namibia acknowledges the technological advance in all fields, but ethical boundaries must be respected. However, artificial intelligence must not be a substitute for human judgment or responsibility. We therefore call for a global standard that ensures that the usage of artificial intelligence remains transparent, fair for humanity. Youth unemployment, increased economic inequality, lack of adequate housing, quality education and health care, water, energy, and debt distress are among the common challenges that no one country can address alone. Through multilateral cooperation, our collective action must ensure that we all forge ahead to make the world a better place and to work together on those challenges in line with our theme, Better Together. Madam President, 30 years since the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform of Action, we have made much to celebrate and to ponder on. Namibia continues to make progress in the area of women participation in politics and decision-making. Currently, Namibia's cabinet has 57% of women. As we gear up to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, adopted during Namibia's presidency of the UN Security Council, Namibia will host two high-level events in Windhoek and New York. I look forward to the participation of all member states in those events to collectively reaffirm commitment to women, peace, and security agenda. And through the Namibia International Women Peace Center, we will continue to advocate for the universal implementation of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. Madam President, we note the ongoing efforts of the UN to ensure that we remain fit for purpose, including the UN 8 initiative. We need an agile United Nations that is inclusive, respect of the UN Charter, and its purpose and principles must be our guiding star for our future endeavors. Madam President, we are meeting against a backdrop of profound global tension. The world is fractured by conflict, displacement, and economic instabilities, straining multilateral cooperation, and a serious issue for us to reach consensus. A global liquidity crisis threatens to plunge millions of people into poverty and insecurity. For Namibia, those crises are real. They impact our communities, test the resilience of our ecosystem, thus need urgent attention. In this context, the Southern Africa Development Community is committed to promoting peace, security, and stability in the Eastern DRC. Namibia welcomes the ongoing efforts by the AU, SADC, and AC to align the Rwanda and Nairobi peace process and encourage the continued strengthening of political and security aspects of the challenges faced in our region. We further call upon UN Security Council and good office of the UN Secretary General to strengthen negotiation and peacekeeping initiatives towards resolutions of all conflict, including those in different parts of Africa. The impasse in the UN security over the question of Western Sahara is an injustice. More than 34 years after the adoption of the Resolution 690 of 1991. The time for the holding of the UN referendum on the right to self-determination for the people of Western Sahara is now. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the Ezuwine Consensus and the Third Declaration, which jointly constitute the common African position on the reform of the UN Security Council. We acknowledge the support from all interested groups for the common African position, which culminated in the recognition of Africa as a priority and a special case in the reform process, as reflected in the outcome document of relevant United Nations process, including the pact for the future. We can no longer delay the urgent call to redress the historical injustice to Africa and address our call for equitable and balanced representation on the Security Council. Madam President, the Charter of the United Nations has laid the foundation for conditions necessary for peaceful coexistence and harmony among nations. Therefore, unilateral cohesive measures should not be used as a tool to undermine sovereign state, for this violates the Charter and the principle of the United Nations. In this regard, we call for an end to the continued illegal economic, financial, and commercial embargo imposed on the friendly people of Cuba and removing her from the list of states sponsoring terrorism. We call for an end to the illegal sanctions on Zimbabwe. We are also gravely concerned about the emerging threats against Venezuela and call for the removal of sanctions and the threats against that country. Madam President, the UN Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestine territory, including Israel, Eastern Jerusalem, has just released its findings that indeed a genocide is being committed against the Palestinian people. Despite the clear provision of the Security Council and General Assembly resolutions and advisory opinion rendered by the International Community of Justice, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is worsening and access to humanitarian aid is severely limited. A failure to address the crisis in Gaza could become the moral failure that defines this era. We call on the UN Security Council to find consensus and help put an end to the lasting conflict between Israel and Palestine. Madam President, I call for a meaningful reform of the United Nations. As a call for the meaningful reform of the United Nations has never been more urgent. This reform necessitated democratizing global governance, amplifying marginalized voices, and ensuring international law is not a tool for convenience, but a shield for most vulnerable. As I conclude, I wish to reaffirm Namibia's commitment to the international obligation and the multilateral order. Respect for international law is not just a legal duty, it's a moral imperative. We must reaffirm our commitment to the principle that unite us, mutual respect, and peaceful resolution of dispute, and solidarity in the face of common challenge. Let us remember that even the smallest nation have a voice. When those voices are heard and heeded, durable peace and justice will prevail. We have an obligation to make this our moment. not to despair, but renewal. We have the opportunity to restore hope, to build a future defined not only by division, but by unity and preservation of human dignity. I thank you for your kind attention.
Au nom de l'Assemblée générale, je tiens à remercier la présidente de la République de Namibie. L'Assemblée va maintenant entendre
The
l'allocution de son
Assembly will now
Excellence
hear an
M.
address by
Mohamed
His
Irfan
Excellency
Ali,
Mr. Mohamed
président de la
Irfan Ali,
République coopérative
President
du
of the
Guyana.
Cooperative Republic of
J'ai pris le
Guyana.
protocole
I
de
request
bien vouloir
protocol to
accompagner
escort
son
His
Excellence que
Excellency
j'invite maintenant à
and
prendre la
invite him
parole.
to address the Assembly.
President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, friends, I extend my heartfelt congratulations to Madam President on her election as President of the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I also record my profound appreciation for His Excellency Philemon Yang of Cameroon, whose distinguished stewardship and steady hand guided the 79th session. Today, as we mark the 80th anniversary of the entry into force of the United Nations Charter, we find ourselves at a crossroads. This organization, our organization, has delivered. From creating international law, promoting development and human rights, to resolving disputes, providing humanitarian aid, and advancing self-determination and independence. The fact remains, over these 8 decades, we have worked together for the greater good. From 51 member states in 1945 to 193 today, the UN has established itself as the premier organization for multilateralism. In fact, it is difficult to imagine our world without the United Nations. However, as it is with anniversaries, we must reflect honestly and candidly, where are we at 80? Conflicts are raging as geopolitical tensions intensify. Food insecurity is worsening. Displacement is growing. Human rights are being ignored, and climate change is threatening lives and livelihoods. Our sustainable development goals are imperiled by shrinking development and budget support. Spending on peacekeeping budgets is diminishing, and humanitarian costs are soaring. Meanwhile, global military spending in 2024 saw its steepest annual increase since the Cold War. President, the United Nations noble mission to maintain international peace and security will ring hollow if it allows power to triumph over principle and might to override right. In remaining faithful to its charter, the United Nations must ensure that the survival and progress of humanity are not mortgaged to the ambitions of the powerful. The collective will of our membership must be reflected in the institutions and governance structure of the United Nations, including the Security Council. On this note, as we prepare to leave the Security Council at the end of this year, I want to thank our permanent representative and a team from Guyana for their exceptional work at the Security Council and their leadership. it is precisely when the ideals of the United Nations are tested by horrific realities that the collective must act in defense of the UN Charter and international law. At present, a dark shadow looms over the 80th session of the General Assembly. Genocide in Palestine, annexation of Ukrainian territory, persecution of women in Afghanistan, humanitarian catastrophe in Sudan, brutal gang violence in Haiti, increased transnational organized crime, trafficking, and illegal immigration. All this as new challenges are emerging. Cybercrime, cyberterrorism, and the pandemic of misinformation and disinformation, alongside the abuse of social media. President, whilst we reiterate our condemnation of the attacks by Hamas on Israel on October 7, 2023, and again call for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, Israel's actions have long shattered any pretense of legitimate self-defense. What we are witnessing is not warfare, but mass extermination, a systematic slaughter and displacement of Palestinian men, women, and children. Those who escape the bombs and bullets are condemned to die slowly, starve of food, water, and hope. This is a war crime. The international community must not remain paralyzed while an entire people is annihilated. Impunity must never triumph over justice. We must take urgent action to halt the genocide, return the hostages, and accelerate our efforts towards the two-state solution. We urge Qatar, Egypt, and the United States to continue their efforts in this regard. Further, the situation in Ukraine remains of utmost concern. Guyana reiterates its call for an urgent end to the Russia-Ukraine war and reaffirms its support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Equally, the international community must act decisively in Haiti, where gang violence, displacement, and shortages of food and medicine have pushed the nation into deepening despair. Restoring security is the foremost priority, requiring strict enforcement of the arms embargo and robust support for a UN-authorized mission. I emphasize that without urgent humanitarian funding and a Haitian-led and owned political process, stability will remain elusive. We must address the root causes of Haiti's continuing troubles, including its historical debt burdens, which stymies its development, prospects, and upliftment of its people. As President Macron acknowledged, making Haiti pay for its independence was unjust. This is a welcome step. President, turning to my own country, Guyana, a small and peaceful state, we have endured repeated threats and aggression from the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. The territorial controversy between our states is now before the International Court of Justice, which has twice reaffirmed its jurisdiction and which in 2023 issued provisional measures ordering Venezuela to refrain from altering the status quo. Yet, Venezuela persists with unilateral laws and threats of annexation, flagrantly violating international law, the UN Charter, and the very principles that sustain global order. If the rights of a small state can be trampled upon and legally binding orders ignored, what protection remains for any nation under international law? Yet, Guyana continues to repose confidence in international law. For us, the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and non-interference are non-negotiable. We will not cower to coercion, intimidation, or unilateral action. We thank our international partners and allies for their solidarity. President, at Haiti, the time has come for a frank conversation on Cuba, one that would lead to the prosperity of its people, optimizing the full potential Cuba offers to its people and the rest of the world. Central to this dialogue is the lifting of the embargo on Cuba and its removal from the list as a state sponsor of terrorism. Also important to our region is our collective effort against drug trafficking, human trafficking, and illegal migration. We support efforts by the international community to addressing these crimes that are destroying the lives of our people, especially young people. The region must continue to champion efforts to enhance democracy, promote good governance, and respect the will of the people in determining governments of their choice through free and fair elections. President, this year marks the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. The Declaration remains a blueprint for achieving gender equality, which, despite transformative strides, remains significantly unrealized in most parts of the world. In Guyana, the dividends of strategic investments in leadership and capacity building for women and girls are evident. More women have assumed leadership roles in government, in parliament, and in public and private sectors. We have achieved gender parity in education at all levels and advanced the socio-economic empowerment of women through land and home ownership and diverse job opportunities in traditional and emerging sectors. To enable women to participate equally and competitively in the workforce, government is offering child care support, which will include day and night care centers for children. President, survival of our people, our economies, and our planet depends on accelerating action on the Sustainable Development Goals. It requires a people-centered approach that prioritizes ending poverty and hunger, ensuring protection of children, support for persons with disabilities, and empowerment of young people. Peace, stability, and sustainable development cannot exist in isolation from the urgent need to address climate change, which poses an existential threat to the most vulnerable and to our shared future. Guyana repeats the call for accelerated, unified global action to limit global warming. We continue to match our words with actions, protecting our forests, investing in sea and river defenses, improving drainage and irrigation, and restoring mangrove ecosystems to protect our people, our land, our livelihoods, and our planet. Our low-carbon development strategy 2030 demonstrates that economic growth and environmental stewardship can advance hand in hand. As the first country certified under the REDD+ Environmental Excellence Standard and a successful seller of carbon credits, we are demonstrating that nature has tangible value and that innovation and responsibility can and must be rewarded. We call on the international community to deliver predictable, accessible climate finance, to support adaptation and resilience, and to embrace nature-based solutions. We once again commend Prime Minister Motley and the Bridgetown Initiative as the path towards sustainable financing for climate action. President, this year marks the 10th anniversary of the Sustainable Development Goals. Yet, the slow pace of implementation and regression in many areas, Song Authority is at risk. Guyana calls for renewed global commitment to financing for development, including fulfilling official development assistance pledges, mobilizing domestic resources, and addressing the crippling debt burdens that hinder progress in many developing nations. Addressing these development challenges requires recognizing that the health of our ecosystems is inseparable from achieving the SDGs. Guyana proudly convened the inaugural Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit in Georgetown in July 2025, uniting over 140 countries, organizations, community groups, indigenous leaders, scientists, and financial institutions. The Georgetown Declaration, endorsed by this broad coalition of stakeholders, sends a clear and urgent message that biodiversity is a global public good and its protection must be woven into national development plans, climate strategies, and financial frameworks. Building on the global pledge to double protected areas by 2025 and achieve the 30 by 30 goal by 2030, the summit underscored the urgent need for innovative financing mechanisms, including biodiversity credit, green bonds, debt for nature swaps to fund nature's protection. Guyana is actively exploring biodiversity credits to create sustainable income streams for forest communities, building on our carbon credit success. We have signed a memorandum of understanding with the Yale Center for Biodiversity and Global Change to co-develop a national biodiversity information system, a digital backbone for data-driven conversation. Guyana is demonstrating that economic development and environmental stewardship can advance together by using natural gas as a bridge away from heavy fuel oil and investing in hydropower, solar, wind, and other renewables. We aim to lower electricity costs for our citizens and businesses while ensuring universal access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy. Guyana is pursuing an ambitious energy infrastructure and investment plan. While climate change is an existential threat, the reality is that the world still requires energy, an energy source from petroleum, to power growth and development for which there is growing demand. This is essential for the survival of our economies. AI and digitization are accelerating this demand at an extraordinary pace. As you're aware, Guyana is quickly becoming one of the world's largest energy producers per capita, carefully balancing its green footprint with energy production. We'll use our vast gas reserves through a transformational gas-to-energy project. We'll use this resource, taking advantage of our strategic geographic location, to establish an AI hyperscale data center. Large AI data centers are rarely found in similar-sized territories. As such, Implementing a project of this scale is of immense pride for Guyana. This investment will improve the competitiveness of our region, accelerate digitization, build out a fintech ecosystem, modernize the service delivery platform of government, and accelerate private investment, bringing new job opportunities. We recognize the indispensable nature of AI in our collective future. However, while there are immense benefits, there is no clarity on equity, access, and applicability. Regulations, ethical standards, and governance mechanisms are urgently needed. In this regard, we welcome the recent UN General Assembly decision to establish 2 global AI governance mechanisms. President, I now turn to food security. Guyana is actively leading efforts to advance the CARICOM Agri-Food Systems Agenda through Vision 2030, aiming to boost food production, end hunger, and ensure food security across the Caribbean region. Our experience demonstrates that strategic investment and political will can transform national and regional food systems. Guyana calls for the transformation of global food systems to be more resilient, sustainable, and equitable by strengthening local production and reducing dependence on volatile markets. Guyana stands ready to share its experience and partner with others to ensure nutritious food for all. As the United Nations commemorates its 80th anniversary, let us recall that this organization was conceived not in comfort, but in crisis, forged from the ashes of war to serve as the conscience and compass of humanity. 8 decades later, that duty has not dimmed, it has only grown more urgent. If the UN is to remain humanity's best hope, it must stand firm against aggression and remain fully engaged with the great question of our time. We must be bold in recognizing the necessity for institutional adjustments that will advance the organization's success. Our generation will be judged not by the eloquence of our declaration, but by the substance of our deeds. From the ruins of Gaza to the streets of Haiti, from cave to the drowning coasts of small island states, the peoples of the world cry out for more than words. To honor 80 years of promise is to act with courage, to match principle with action, and to bind ourselves once more to the dream of a world united, not by fear or force, but by the shared destiny and enduring hope. I thank you, and may God bless all of our nations and all of our people. Thank you.
Au nom de l'Assemblée
On
générale,
behalf of the
je
General
tiens à
Assembly, I
remercier
wish to thank
le président de la
the
République
President of
coopérative
the
du Guyana.
Cooperative Republic of Guyana.
L'Assemblée va maintenant
The Assembly
entendre
will hear an address
une allocution de Son
by His
Excellence M.
Excellency
Taneti
Mr.
Mamao,
Taneti Mamao,
président et
President
ministre des
and
Affaires
Minister
étrangères
for
et de
Foreign
l'immigration
Affairs and
de la République
Immigration
de Kiribati.
of the Republic of
Je prie
Kiribati.
le protocole de bien
I
vouloir
request
accompagner Son
protocol to
Excellence
escort His
que
Excellency
j'invite à
and
prendre
invite
la
him
parole devant
to
l'Assemblée.
address the Assembly.
Madam President of the General Assembly, Head of States and Governments, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. In His holy name and on behalf of the government and the people of Kiribati, I extend our warm greetings to you all. I am honored to warmly congratulate you, Madam President, on your election to preside over this historic 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly, and I wish you every success as you guide these important deliberations. Madam President, we commend your theme, Better Together, 80 years and more for peace and development and human rights, reminding us of the enduring importance of multilateral cooperation in addressing global challenges. For Kiribati, it underscores the value of working collectively to advance peace, safeguard human rights, and promote sustainable development. Your Excellencies, Kiribati welcomes the initiative of the Secretary General to reform the United Nations for the challenges and realities of the 21st century in order for it to respond more effectively to member needs, especially small island developing states or SIDS, and the least developed countries, LDS. These countries are faced with unique and special circumstances that require targeted assistance and support from the UN. The Secretary General's UN 80 initiative is a crucial step toward a more effective UN. In this context, we encourage reforms that remove duplication, improve efficiency, and ensure that mandates most vital to vulnerable nations, such as climate action, sustainable development, and resilience, are protected and enhanced. Kiribati is proud. Since joining the UN, we have been contributing in our way to its mandates and its initiatives. On the international level, especially peace and security, Kiribati has actively supported the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, particularly in the implementation of Article 6 and 7, efforts which we jointly coordinate with Kazakhstan. We fully support the United Nations push for a world free of nuclear weapons and are committed to addressing man-made disasters like dumping of nuclear waste, radioactivity wastewater discharges, and traversing of nuclear-powered submarines, and testing that pose grave risk to our oceans' fragile health. Advocating for a nuclear-free ocean and the world should be backed by our commitment to peace and security. Kiribati has strengthened governance in the capital and is now working with the outer highlands to improve accountability, develop relevant initiatives, manage assets, and enhance customer service. These efforts are very essential for peace and security. Aligned with our KV20 roadmap to transform Kiribati into a healthy, wealthy, and peaceful nation, we sent our police officers to support the UN peacekeeping missions. Kiribati also actively engages in social and cultural initiatives for peaceful living. Gospel Day, now celebrated across Kiribati, unites all faith-based organizations to worship together, fostering respect, unity, and peace. We hope this approach promotes religious tolerance worldwide, making it a better place to live. Peace, security, and respect for the UN Charter are essential for sustainable development. Kiribati is committed to SDGs, emphasizing SIDS or small island developing states' unique circumstances. Along with the other SIDS in the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, ABES, we aim for resilient prosperity through technological and digital solutions. These innovations are vital to overcoming challenges from geographical isolation and limited economies of scale. While Kiribati has technological constraints, we see digital solutions as key to enhancing public services, education, commerce, and climate resilience. Kiribati faces climate challenges, but it remains resilient. While some narratives claim our islands are sinking, we have traditional and modern strategies to adapt and thrive. Our efforts, aligned with international climate goals, focus on building resilience, protecting livelihoods, and preserving our culture. We urge global action to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and support
and socio-economic shocks. These devastating economies, destroying livelihoods and diverting limited public resources towards mitigating and adaptation responses, which take away from other vital social investment like education and health. The impact of climate change is forcing governments in developing countries, including my own, to make impossible financial trade-offs, which hamper our own aspiration for investing in resilience and development. Around 10% of the developing nations' budgets are diverted to responding to climate change. This needs to be addressed urgently through developed industrialized nations by meeting their financial obligations for climate crisis. They continue to exacerbate the climate crisis that continue to exacerbate. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today, for us, climate change is not an abstract. It is a horrible reality of disrupted and destroyed lives. Somalia's contributes almost nothing to global emission, yet we endure some of the harshest consequences. Droughts, floods, and rising seas erode livelihoods and displace families, threatening to undo the progress we are making towards peace and development. As a government, we understand that addressing the adverse impact of climate change is a global public good that requires strong partnership and genuine burden sharing. On our part, Somalia has adopted the National Climate Change Policy, updated our national determined contribution, and is preparing its first biennial transparency report. We are also developing a robust national climate finance strategy to guide how we mobilize and manage resources to address the challenge. To ensure these resources are used effectively, we have established the National Climate Fund, a dedicated institution to channel climate financing transparently and directly to the communities on the ground, to the communities on the ground. We are restoring degraded lands, strengthening water security, and piloting nature-based solutions that protect both people and ecosystems. Despite our efforts, accessing climate finance remains too slow and complex. As our government strengthens its domestic revenue capacity and initiates the process for pre-arranging disaster risk financing, we call for financial support that is accessible, affordable, predictable, and just from the international financing institutions and capital markets. Nations on the front line, like Somalia, cannot be left to face this crisis alone, unsupported by the dominant global financial architecture, which is not fit for the purpose in this age of great challenge. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, the 80th anniversary of the UN General Assembly is the best possible opportunity to take stock of our global achievement as far as our common commitments to sustainable development are concerned. We quietly transitioned from the Millennium Development Goals to now the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I wonder, with the clock rapidly ticking very fast towards 2030, what the next acronyms of our global development aspirations will be. For us, being better together means common ownership, common responsibility, and genuine partner sharing on the global achievement of sustainable development through investment in a resilient and fair future for all. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Federal Republic of Somalia. And now the Assembly will hear an address of His Excellency Jakob Mitovic, President of Montenegro. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to convey my warmest congratulations to Her Excellency Annalena Baerbock on her election as the President of the 80th session of the General Assembly. This election is both historic and inspiring, as she is only the 5th woman entrusted with this very high responsibility. We recall Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit from India, who spoke with the voice of a liberated Asia. Angie Brooks, a Liberian diplomat and the judge who championed the rights of small states and women in Africa. Haya Rashid Al Khalifa from Bahrain, who brought a message of dialogue and international law from the heart of the Middle East. And Maria Fernanda Espinosa from Ecuador, who raised her voice for climate action and indigenous people of Latin America. And each of them left a mark of their time. So this election gives Europe the opportunity to embody the principles of the unwavering defense of human rights and multilateralism. Dear colleagues, this year, as we commemorate 80 years since the founding of the United Nations, we reflect on the remarkable journey of this great organization that was created as a mission of global peace. Born from the ashes of the Second World War, the United Nations emerged as a beacon of hope for humanity. Dear colleagues, imagine the devastated cities throughout the world back in 1945. Warsaw, reduced to ashes. St. Petersburg, shattered after the years of the siege. Berlin, in ruins. Hiroshima and Nagasaki struck by the unimaginable horror. And my hometown and the current capital of Montenegro, Podgorica, was also in the bombings virtually razed to the ground. And imagine at the same time the world leaders gathered who, despite their wounds, looked to the future. And at that very moment, when the trenches between nations still existed and the graves of the loved ones were still fresh, the Organization of the United Nations was born. The idea that light could emerge from darkness and that solidarity could triumph over despair. Despite the unprecedented destruction, the idea of peace and unity triumphed over division and hostility. The leaders of that time understood the urgent need for a strong global organization capable of preventing all future wars and fostering cooperation among nations. As part of the former Yugoslavia, Montenegro was among the founding nations of the United Nations. We have so far established an international system that promotes peace, upholds rules-based global order, safeguards human rights, and fosters sustainable development. Dear colleagues, without the United Nations, much of our collective progress would have remained just a distant dream. Yet, even after 8 decades, we must also acknowledge a sobering truth. The absence of the World War has not always meant the presence of genuine peace and prosperity in the world. Today, multilateralism is being tested like never before, and our world is confronted with devastating conflicts, rising polarization, grave human rights violations, deep economic inequalities, and the corrosive spread of disinformation. Those challenges remind us of one essential fact: we cannot afford the marginalization of the United Nations, nor the silencing of the international law. Dear colleagues, now more than ever, we need to renew our commitment to the founding principles of the UN Charter. And despite its imperfections, the United Nations remains the only global organization where every nation has a seat and a voice, and where international law remains the basis for international legitimacy. And that makes the United Nations indispensable. Ladies and gentlemen, since regaining our independence back in 2006, Montenegro worked hand in hand with the United Nations to advance reforms in sustainable development, human rights and good governance, and in line with our European Union membership aspirations. Next year, we will proudly mark 2 decades of regaining our independence, as well as 2 decades of our UN membership. So over the past 20 years, Montenegro has evolved into a modern democracy. This transformation is also reflected in our economy, which has grown steadily, driven by key sectors such as tourism and energy. Our resilience has been tested by many global crises. Yet, Montenegro remains firmly committed to building a knowledge-based economy that fosters sustainable development and contributes to regional stability and regional prosperity. Montenegro's commitment to the United Nations and multilateralism remains a cornerstone of our foreign policy. fully in harmony with our European and Euro-Atlantic paths, and our dedication to good neighborly relations and regional cooperation. With NATO membership as the pillar of our security, our strategic focus is now on joining the European Union by 2028. It's an ambitious goal, dear colleagues, yet one that is now firmly within our reach. And as the most advanced EU candidate country, Montenegro remains steadfast in implementing structural reforms and fully aligned with the European Union's common foreign and security policy. We are convinced that the EU integration is a catalyst for lasting progress, stability, and ultimately security of the European continent. And in this process, Montenegro is not only a beneficiary, but also a contributor, demonstrating that enlargement strengthens the European Union as much as it strengthens the candidate countries. Your Excellencies, to strengthen multilateralism, we also must confront its weaknesses. The Security Council is increasingly paralyzed and unable to fulfill its mandate as the primary guardian of peace and security. The latest example is the war in Ukraine, which has brought unimaginable suffering to the people of Ukraine. And Montenegro welcomes recent diplomatic efforts of the international community led by the United States aimed at achieving a just and lasting peace. And we sincerely hope that these efforts will succeed. At the same time, Montenegro is deeply concerned about the unfolding humanitarian suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza. And we call for an immediate ceasefire. Montenegro also strongly condemned the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas on October the 7th, 2023, and calls for unconditional release of all hostages. Montenegro has consistently supported a peaceful resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on the two-state solution in full accordance with international law and relevant United Nations resolutions. And this is why we also endorsed the New York Declaration on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution. Dear colleagues, dear delegates, Montenegro fully supports the implementation of the UN Pact for the Future, as well as the Seville Compromise, a renewed global commitment for financing sustainable development, as important steps in strengthening our collective capacity to respond to global challenges. And we also believe that the upcoming second World Summit for Social Development must move decisively beyond reflection and analysis and deliver concrete, tangible solutions that will improve lives of people across the globe. Ladies and gentlemen, back in 1991, Montenegro proudly became the world's first ecological state, a milestone that proclaimed our commitment to the highest principles of environmental protection, the preservation of nature, and the pursuit of sustainable development. UN Agenda 2030 remains our guiding light for sustainable development. And Montenegro takes pride in being among the first countries in the world to integrate all the SDGs into its national framework almost a decade ago. A further important step in advancing the implementation of the 2030 Agenda was the creation of the SDG Acceleration Fund. a powerful mechanism for financing SDG goals. Ladies and gentlemen, for Montenegro, the priority is clear, which is to create conditions that will enable our young people to build their future at home, offering them equal opportunities to thrive. And by insisting on the value of knowledge and ensuring equal access to education, we strive to reduce inequalities and empower our citizens to reach their full potential. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change must be tackled globally and urgently. And it is no longer just warnings from the scientists. It is floods that swallow villages and cities, fires that destroy forests, fields, and homes, and delaying a more decisive action on the international scale means gambling with the lives of those who live today, but also of the future generations. Dear colleagues, rapid technological change, and particularly the rise of the artificial intelligence, must be harnessed in a safe, responsible, and inclusive manner. Technology should be an evolutionary gift to humanity, developed, founded, and guided with social responsibility, serving the greater good. Ladies and gentlemen, globally, human rights and fundamental freedoms continue to face serious challenges. And while significant progress has been achieved in advancing women's rights since the adoption of the Beijing Declaration, much remains to be done. In this regard, Montenegro is fully committed to gender equality. We have harmonized national policies with the best international standards, strengthened our institutions dedicated to the protection of women's rights, and promoted women's leadership in all spheres of our society. Your Excellencies, as we celebrate today 80 years of shared achievements, our collective task is to reform the United Nations and prepare it for the challenges and opportunities of the future. Criticism of the UN reflects not just on the organization itself, but on all of us as member states. For it is we who have created it, who guide it, and who bear responsibility to strengthen it. This is why Montenegro strongly supports the Secretary General's reform initiative, UN80. It must not be seen as a mere bureaucratic exercise, but embraced as a commitment, a solemn commitment that the United Nations of tomorrow will be more agile and more efficient. And at the heart of these efforts must remain the UN's three key pillars: peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights, as the bedrock of all United Nations action. To conclude, dear friends, Montenegro is firm in its conviction that the United Nations must remain the cornerstone of peace, international law must prevail over force, and the rule-based order must be further strengthened. For without these principles, there can be no trust among nations, no true security, and no hope for a just and lasting peace in the world. And let me, at the end, quote the most famous writer from our part of the world and the Nobel Prize laureate, Ivo Andrić, who wrote in his masterpiece, The Bridge on the River Drina, everything that man erects and builds in his urge for living, nothing is, in my eyes, better and more valuable than bridges. They're more important than houses, more sacred than temples, for they belong to all and are equal for everyone. Dear colleagues, this timeless truth reminds us that bridges are not only structures of stone, but structures of peace. It is a dialogue that builds bridges, and it is only through bridges that nations can walk towards peace. So our task is not to be passive heirs of history, but active builders of a better legacy. So let the next 8 years of the United Nations be not years of hesitation, but of courage and solidarity. So guided by these values, Montenegro will continue to build bridges, strengthen dialogue, and work tirelessly towards a future of stability, future of progress, and future of common success, fully aligned with the very spirit and mission of the United Nations. Thank you very much for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of Montenegro. In accordance with Resolution 80/1 of 19 September 2025, I give the floor to the distinguished observer of the Observer State of Palestine to introduce an address by the head of the state.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سعادة أنالينا
name
بيربوك رئيس
of God the
الجمعية
Merciful, the
العامة
Compassionate,
معالي
Her
أنطونيو
Excellency
غوتيريش
Annalena
الأمين
Baerbock,
العام للأمم
President of the General
المتحدة
Assembly, His Excellency
أصحاب
Antonio
الفخامة
Guterres,
والسمو
Secretary General of the
ورؤساء
United
الوفود
Nations, Your
السلام
Excellencies,
عليكم
Highnesses, and
ورحمة
Heads of
الله
Delegations,
وبركاته.
may the mercy and blessings of
أتحدث
God be
إليكم
upon you.
اليوم بعد
I
مرور
speak to you
قرابة
today after
عامين
almost 2 years
يواجه
in which
فيها
our
شعبنا
Palestinian people
الفلسطيني
in the
في
Gaza
قطاع
Strip
غزة حرب
have been
إبادة
facing a
جماعية
war of
وتدمير
genocide,
وتجويع
destruction,
وتهجير
starvation,
تشنها
and displacement
قوات الاحتلال
waged by the
الإسرائيلي
Israeli
قتلت
occupation
وجرحت
forces,
خلالها
in which
أكثر
they
من
killed and injured
220,000
more than
ألف فلسطيني
220,000
غالبيتهم من
Palestinians,
الأطفال
the majority
والنساء
of
والشيوخ
whom
العنف
are unarmed children,
وشردت
women, and the
مئات
elderly.
الآلاف
A war in which they
ومنعت
displaced
وصول
hundreds of
المواد
thousands and
الغذائية
prevented
والطبية
the entry
وتسببت
of
في
food and
تجويع
medical supplies and caused
مليوني
the
فلسطيني
starvation of 2 million Palestinians.
وفرضت حصارا
They
خانقا
imposed
على شعب
a stifling
بأكمله
siege on an
ودمرت
entire
أكثر
people
من
and destroyed
80%
more than
من
80%
البيوت
of homes,
والمدارس
schools,
والمستشفيات
hospitals,
والكنائس والمساجد
churches,
والمرافق
mosques,
والبنية
facilities,
التحتية.
and infrastructure.
إن ما تقوم به
What
إسرائيل
Israel is
ليس
carrying
مجرد
out
عدوان
is not merely an
بل
aggression.
جريمة حرب
It is a war
وجريمة
crime
ضد
and a crime
الإنسانية
against humanity
موثقة
that is both
ومرصودة
documented and monitored,
وستسجلها كتب
and it will
التاريخ
be recorded
وصحف الضمير
in history
العالمي
books and the pages of
كأحد
international
أكثر
conscience
فصول
as
المأساة
one of
الإنسانية
the most
فظاعة
horrific
في
chapters of
القرنين
humanitarian tragedy
العشرين
in the 20th and
والحادي
21st centuries.
وفي الضفة الغربية
In the
بما
West
فيها
Bank,
القدس الشرقية
including East
عاصمة
Jerusalem, the
دولتنا
capital
الفلسطين
of the state of
تمضي
Palestine,
الحكومة الإسرائيلية
the
المتطرفة
extremist Israeli
في
government
تنفيذ
continues
سياساتها
to
الاستعمارية
implement
عبر التوسع
its settlement
الاستيطاني
policies
غير
through
القانوني
illegal settlement
ووضع
expansion
مشاريع تضم
and developing
المستوطنات.
projects for
كان
annexing
آخرها
settlements.
خطة
The
البناء
latest
في
was the
إيوان
construction plan
التي
for
تقسم
E1,
الضفة
which
الغربية
would
إلى
divide the
قسمين
West Bank into two
وتعزل
parts
القدس
and would
المحتلة عن
isolate
محيطها
occupied Jerusalem from its surroundings
وتقوض
and would
خيار حل
undermine
الدولتين
the option of the two-state
انتهاك
solution
صارخ
in a
للقانون
blatant
الدولي
violation of
ولقرارات
international
مجلس
law
الأمن ذات
and
الصلة
relevant
وعلى
Security Council
رأسها
resolutions,
القرار
specifically Resolution 2334.
علاوة على إعلان
Furthermore,
رئيس
the Israeli
الوزراء
Prime Minister
الإسرائيلي
announced
خطة ما
a plan
يسميه
for what he calls
إسرائيل الكبرى
Greater Israel,
التي نرفضها
which we reject
ونستنكرها أشد
and
الاستنكار
completely deplore,
والتي تشمل
and which
التوسع
involves
في دول
expanding
عربية
into
ذات سيادة
sovereign Arab
فضلا
states,
عن الهجوم
in
الغاشم
addition
على دولة
to the
قطر
brutal
الشقيقة
attack against
والذي
the
ندينه
sisterly state of
ونعتبره
Qatar,
تصعيدا
which we
في
condemn
غاية الخطورة
and see as an escalation
وانتهاكا
that is
صارخا
grave
للقانون
and a
الدولي
blatant violation of
ويتطلب
international law,
تدخلا
which requires
حاسما
a decisive
وإجراءات
intervention and
رادعة
deterring
لمثل
procedures
هذه
and measures
المخططات
for such
العنصرية
expansionary
وبدعم
plans.
رسمي
With
وتسهيلات
official support
متزايدة
and through increasing
يتنامى إرهاب
facilities, the
المستوطنين
terrorism of
الذين
settlers
يحرقون البيوت والحقول
increases. They burn homes
ويخترقون
and fields,
الأشجار
they uproot trees
ويهاجمون
and
القرى
attack
ويعتدون
villages
على
and
المدنيين
attack
الفلسطينيين
unarmed
العزل
Palestinian
بل
civilians.
ويقتلون
In fact, they killed
في
them
وضح النهار
in broad
تحت
daylight
حماية
under
جيش
the protection
الاحتلال
of the
الإسرائيلي.
Israeli occupation
إلى
army.
جانب ذلك لم
Furthermore,
تسلم الأماكن الدينية
the
الإسلامية
Islamic and Christian
والمسيحية
religious
في
sites
القدس
in
والضفة
Jerusalem,
الغربية وقطاع غزة
Hebron,
والخليل
and Gaza Strip
من الاعتداءات
have not
والانتهاكات
been
التي
spared
طالت حرمة
the attacks
المساجد والكنائس
which
والمقابر
have
في تعد
damaged
سافر
the
على
mosques,
الوضع
churches, and
التاريخي
cemeteries in
والقانون
a blatant
القائم
violation
وفي
of the
مخالفة
historic status
صريحة
quo and in a
لأحكام
clear
القانون
violation
الدولي
of the provisions of the international law.
ورغم كل ما عاناه شعبنا
Despite all what
فإننا
our people have
نرفض ما
suffered,
قامت به
we
حركة
reject
حماس في
what
السابع من
Hamas
أكتوبر
carried out on the
من
7th of
أعمال
October.
استهدفت
These
المدنيين
actions that
الإسرائيليين
targeted Israeli
وأخذهم
civilians
رهائن
and took
لأن
them
هذه الأفعال
hostages, because
لا
these
تمثل
actions
الشعب
do not
الفلسطيني
represent the Palestinian
ولا
people,
نضاله
nor do they
العادل
represent
من
their
أجل
just
الحرية
struggle for
والاستقلال.
freedom and independence.
وقد أكدنا
We
وسنظل
have
نؤكد
affirmed and we
أن
will
قطاع
continue to
غزة جزء
affirm
لا
that the Gaza
يتجزأ من
Strip
دولة
is an
فلسطين
integral part of the state of
وأننا
Palestine,
مستعدون لتحمل
and that we are
كامل
ready to
المسؤولية عن
bear full
الحكم والأمن
responsibility
فيه
for
ولن يكون
governance and
لحماس
security there.
دور في الحكم
Hamas will not have
حيث
a role to
يتوجب
play in
عليها
governance.
وغيرها أيضا
Hamas
من
and
الفصائل
other
تسليم
factions
سلاحها
will have
للسلطة
to hand
الوطنية
over their weapons
الفلسطينية
to the Palestinian
في
National
إطار عملية
Authority
التوجه لبناء
as part of a
مؤسسات
process
الدولة
to build
الواحدة
the institutions of
والقانون الواحد
one state
وقوات
one law
الأمن الشرعية الواحدة
and one
مجددين التأكيد
legal
على
security forces.
أننا
We
لا
reiterate
نريد
that we do
دولة
not want
مسلحة.
an armed state.
السيدات والسادة
Ladies and gentlemen,
جراحنا عميقة
our wounds are deep
وكارثتنا
and our
كبيرة
calamity is
ولا
great.
يزال 7 ملايين
7
من
million
الفلسطينيين
Palestinians
يعيشون
are
ويلات
still
النكبة
living the
والتهجير
tragedies
منذ
of the
العام
Nakba and displacement since
1948
1948.
ولا يزال شعبنا في
Our
الضفة
people in
الغربية
the West Bank,
بما فيها القدس
including East
الشرقية وقطاع
Jerusalem
غزة
and in the Gaza
يعيش
Strip,
مآسي
are still
العدوان
living
والاحتلال
the tragedies
الإسرائيلي
of
منذ
the
عشرات
Israeli
السنين.
aggression and occupation for
سنوات
decades.
يعيشها
Years
شعبنا
that our people
تحت
have spent
الاحتلال
under
والقتل
occupation,
والاعتقالات
killing,
والاستيطان
arrests,
وسرقة
and
الأموال
settlement, and the theft of money,
والممتلكات
property,
والأرض
and
ولا
lands.
زالت مستمرة
And this still
دون
continues
رادع
without
أو حسيب.
any deterrent or
سنوات من
accountability.
القهر والحرمان
Years of
وحماية
oppression,
المحتل
deprivation, and the
وتمكينه
protection for the
بدلا من حماية
occupier,
الشعب
and
الواقع
enabling
تحت
the
الاحتلال
occupier instead of
والمزيد من
protecting the
الانتهاكات
people under the
لحقوق شعبنا
occupation,
الفلسطيني في
and more
تقرير مصيره
violations of the rights of our
الحرية
Palestinian people to
والكرامة
self-determination,
والاستقلال
to freedom,
والسيادة
dignity,
على أرض
independence,
دولة
and
فلسطين
sovereignty on the
المحتلة
land of the
منذ
occupied state,
العام
on the land of the state of
67
Palestine
بما
occupied since
فيها القدس
1967,
الشرقية.
including East Jerusalem.
أكثر من 1000 قرار في
More than
الأمم
1,000
المتحدة
resolutions
لم
at the United
ينفذ
Nations.
واحد منها
Not one of them was
والعديد
implemented.
من الجهود
There have been
والمبادرات
many
الدولية
efforts, many
دون
international
الوصول إلى
initiatives
نهاية
without
لهذا
reaching
الوضع
an end
المأساوي
to this tragic
الذي يعيشه
situation
الشعب
that the
الفلسطيني
Palestinian people
تحت
are
نير
living under
الاحتلال.
the yoke of occupation.
وفي العام 1993
In
وقعنا
1993,
اتفاق أوسلو
we signed the Oslo
والتزمنا
Accords
بكل
and we
بنوده
adhered to all its items. and we recognized
بدولة
the
إسرائيل
state of Israel.
واعترفت إسرائيل
Israel,
في ذلك الوقت
at the time,
بمنظمة
recognized
التحرير
the Palestine
الفلسطينية
Liberation
ممثلا شرعيا
Organization
ووحيدا
as the
للشعب
sole
الفلسطيني.
legitimate representative
على
of the
هذا
Palestinian people.
أعدنا
Based on that,
هيكلة
we restructured
مؤسساتنا
our institutions
وعدلنا ميثاقنا
and we
الوطني
amended our national
ونبذنا
charter,
العنف
and we
والإرهاب
rejected violence and terrorism,
واعتمدنا ثقافة
and we adopted a
السلام
culture of
وبذلنا
peace.
كل جهد
We made
لبناء
all our efforts
مؤسسات
to build
دولة
the institutions
فلسطينية
of a
حصرية
modern Palestinian
تعيش
state
جنبا
that
إلى
lives
جنب
side
في
by
أمن
side
وسلام
in peace
مع
and
دولة
security
إسرائيل
with Israel.
ولكن إسرائيل
But Israel
لم
did not
تلتزم
adhere to the signed
بالاتفاقات الموقعة
agreements
وعملت
and
بشكل
has worked
ممنهج على
systematically
تقويم.
on undermining them.
السيدات والسادة
Ladies and gentlemen,
قبل 3 أيام فقط
just 3 days ago,
اجتمعنا في مؤتمر دولي
we
رفيع
met at a
المستوى
high
في
level
نيويورك
international
تحت
conference in New
الرئاسة
York
المشتركة
under the joint
لفرنسا
chairmanship
والمملكة
of
العربية
France and the
السعودية
Kingdom of Saudi Arabia,
وبحضور دولي واسع
with wide-scale
ومواقف
international
موحدة
presence and
عبرت عن
united
إرادة
positions that
دولية
expressed a
حقيقية
genuine
لوضع حد
international
لهذا
will
الصراع
to put
التاريخي
an end to this historic conflict
الاعتراف
by
بدولة
recognizing the
فلسطين
state of Palestine,
وإنهاء الاحتلال
ending the
وإعادة
occupation,
الأمل
and returning
للشعبين
hope to
الفلسطيني
both the Palestinian
والإسرائيلي.
and Israeli people.
وأود هنا أن أعبر باسم
And
الشعب
here,
الفلسطيني
I would like to,
عن
on behalf
بالغ
of the
التقدير
Palestinian people,
والعرفان
to express
لجميع
our
الدول
gratitude and
التي
appreciation
اعترفت
to
مؤخراً
all the
بدولة
states that
فلسطين
recently
وتلك
recognized the state
التي
of
تنوي
Palestine
الاعتراف
and
في
those
وقت
that
قريب.
intend to recognize the
ونحث
state of Palestine
جميع
soon.
الدول
We
التي
urge all the
لم
states
تعترف
that
أن
have not done
تقوم
so yet
بذلك.
to recognize the state of
ونطالب
Palestine.
بدعم
We
حصول
call on
فلسطين
supporting
أيضاً على
Palestine
العضوية
obtaining
الكاملة في الأمم
full membership
المتحدة
in the United Nations.
علماً
It should be
بأننا
noted
سبق وأن
that we
اعترفنا
have
بحق
already
إسرائيل في الوجود
recognized Israel's right
في
to
عام
exist in
1988
1988
وفي عام
and in 1993,
1993 ولا زلنا
and we
نعترف
still
بها.
recognize this right.
وفي هذا الصدد
In this regard,
نشكر كل
we
من
would like
فرنسا
to thank
وبريطانيا
France,
وكندا
the
وأستراليا
UK,
وبلجيكا
Canada, Australia,
والبرتغال
Belgium,
واللوكسمبورغ
Portugal, Luxembourg,
ومالطا
Malta,
وموناكو
Monaco,
وسان
San
مارينو
Marino,
والدنمارك
Andorra,
على
and Denmark
اعترافهم
for
بدولة
their
فلسطين.
recognition of the state of
والشكر
Palestine.
لجميع الدول
We would like to thank all
149
149
التي
states
اعترفت
which
سابقا
had previously
بدولة
recognized the
فلسطين.
state of Palestine.
شعبنا
Our
لن ينسى
people
لكم هذا
will not
الموقف.
forget this noble position.
كما نشيد بالدور
We would
الكبير
also like to commend
لرئاسة المؤتمر
the
المملكة العربية
role of the
السعودية
chairmanship
وفرنسا.
of this conference, the Kingdom of
وكذلك
Saudi Arabia
بمصر.
and France, and also the
والشكر
United Kingdom.
موصول
We would
لجميع
also like
الدول
to thank
التي
all
ترأست
the states
مجموعات العمل
that headed the
وتلك التي
various working
شاركت
groups and
وتشارك
those which
التحالف الدولي
participated and continue to participate in the International
كما
Alliance
نشكر
for
الدول
Peace.
التي
We would
تساند
also like to
جهودنا
thank the states that are
في
supporting
وقف
our efforts
الإبادة
to stop
الجماعية
the genocide
وإنهاء
and the
الاحتلال
occupation
وتحقيق
and
السلام.
achieve peace.
ونقدر
We
عاليا
highly appreciate
جميع الشعوب
all the
والمنظمات
peoples and organizations around the world
التي تظاهرت دعما
who
لحقوق الشعب
protested in
الفلسطيني
support
في
of the
الحرية
rights of the
والاستقلال
Palestinian people to freedom
ولوقف
and
الحرب
independence
والتدمير
and to stop
والتجويع
the war, destruction, and
ونرفض
starvation.
الخلط
We
بين
reject
التضامن مع القضية
confusing the
الفلسطينية
solidarity with
ومسألة
the
العادات
Palestinian cause
السامية
and the
والتي
issue of
نرفضها
anti-Semitism,
انطلاقا
which is something
من
that we
قيمنا
reject based on
ومبادئنا.
our values and principles.
وفي إطار ترحيبنا بما
Within the
صدر عن
framework of
المؤتمر
welcoming
الدولي للسلام
the
نجدد
outcomes
اليوم
of the International
أمام
Conference for
الجمعية
Peace,
العامة
we
تأكيدنا
reiterate
على
today
ما
before the General Assembly
أولاً
the following points.
ضرورة
First,
الوقف الفوري
the need
والدائم للحرب
for
في
an
غزة.
immediate and permanent end to the
ثانياً
war in
إدخال
Gaza.
المساعدات الإنسانية دون شروط
The entry
من خلال
without
منظمات
conditions of
الأمم
humanitarian
المتحدة
aid
بما فيها وكالة
through
الأونروا
United Nations
ووقف
organizations,
استخدام
including the
التجويع
UNRWA,
كسلاح
and to stop
ونشكر
using
في هذا
starvation
الصدد
as a weapon.
الدول
And
والمنظمات
here we would like to thank
الصديقة والشقيقة.
the brotherly and
التي
friendly states and
ترسل
organizations that have been sending
ثالثاً
aids.
الإفراج عن
Third,
جميع
the
الرهائن
release of
والأسرى
all
من الجانبين.
hostages and prisoners on both sides.
رابعاً الانسحاب الكامل
The complete
للاحتلال
withdrawal
من
of the
قطاع غزة.
occupation from the Gaza
ورفض
Strip
مخططات
and the
التهجير
rejection of the
ووقف
plans for
الاستيطان
displacement and putting
وإرهاب
an end
المستوطنين
to settlement,
وسرقة
the
الأرض
terrorism of
والممتلكات
settlers and the
الفلسطينية
theft of
تحت
Palestinian
مسميات الضم
lands and
ووقف
property
الاعتداءات
under
على الوضع
the
التاريخي والقانوني
headline of annexation
الأماكن
and stopping
المقدسة
the aggression against
وجميعها
the status quo in
أعمال أحادية
holy sites. These are
تقوض
all
حل
unilateral
الدولتين
actions that undermine the
غزة
two-state
وبالضبط.
solution in Gaza, the West Bank,
خامساً
and Jerusalem.
تولي دولة
Fifth,
فلسطين
the state of
مسؤولياتها
Palestine
كاملة
should
بدءاً
take
باللجنة
their full
الإدارية
responsibility,
لقطاع غزة
starting with the
التي
administrative
يرأسها
committee
وزير
for the
في
Gaza
الحكومة
Strip,
الفلسطينية
which is chaired by a
لإدارة
minister
شؤون
in the
القطاع
Palestinian government to manage the
لفترة
affairs
مؤقتة
of the Gaza Strip
والربط
for
مع
a temporary
الضفة
period,
الغربية
and
وكل
then to
ذلك
connect that with
بدعم
the West Bank,
عربي
all
ودولي
through Arab and
بوجود
international
عربي
support,
ودولي
and with Arab and
لحماية
international
المدنيين
presence
في غزة
to protect
ودعم
civilians in
القوات
Gaza
الفلسطينية
and
تحت
support
مظلة
the
الأمم
Palestinian forces under
المتحدة
the umbrella of the
ولا
United
يكون
Nations
بديلاً عنها.
rather than
سادساً
being a replacement.
ضمان بقاء سكان
Sixth,
قطاع
to
غزة في
guarantee that
أرضهم
the residents of the Gaza
دون
Strip
تهجير
remain on their lands
وتنفيذ
without
خطة
displacement,
تعافي
and to
وإعادة
implement a
الإعمار
recovery
في
and
كل
reconstruction
من
plan
قطاع
in both
غزة
the Gaza
والضفة
Strip
الغربية.
and the West Bank.
سابعاً
Seventh,
الإفراج عن أموال الضرائب
releasing the
الفلسطينية
Palestinian tax
التي
money that is
تحتجزها
being
دولة
held
إسرائيل دون
by
حق
the state of Israel
ورفع
unjustly,
الحواجز والحصار
and
الاقتصادي
lifting the
عن
economic
المدن
siege
والقرى
and the barriers
والمخيمات
from the
والمنازل.
Palestinian cities, villages, and
ثامناً
refugee camps.
دعم جهودنا
Eighth,
الوطنية
supporting our national
بالإصلاح
efforts towards
وإجراء
reform
الانتخابات
and
الرئاسية
conducting presidential
والبرلمانية
and
خلال
parliamentary
عام
elections
بعد
within a
انتهاء
year
الحرب.
after the
قد
end of the
بدأت
war.
الإجراءات العملية
The
بتكليف
practical
لجنة صياغة
procedures
الدستور
has begun.
المؤقت
A committee has
والتي
been
تنهي
assigned
أعمالها
to
خلال
draft a
3 شهور
temporary constitution, and it will
للانتقال
end its work within
من
3
السلطة
months,
إلى الدولة.
so that we move from
إننا نريد
authority
دولة
to state. We
ديمقراطية
want a modern
عصرية
and democratic state
تلتزم بالقانون
that abides by
الدولي
international law,
وبسيادة القانون
the rule of law,
والتعددية
and
والانتقال
multilateralism,
السلمي
and the
للسلطة
peaceful transition
ونحرص
of
كل
power.
الحرص
And we
على
are
تمكين
extremely keen to empower
المرأة والشباب.
women and the youth.
تاسعاً
Ninth,
نعلن استعدادنا
we declare
للعمل
that we are ready
مع
to
الرئيس
work
الأمريكي
with
دونالد
US
ترامب
President Donald
ومع
Trump
المملكة
and with the
العربية
Kingdom of
السعودية
Saudi
وفرنسا
Arabia
والأمم
and
المتحدة
France, the United
وجميع
Nations, and all partners
لتنفيذ خطة
to
السلام
implement the
التي
peace plan
أقرت في
that was
المؤتمر
approved
المنعقد في
in
22
the
سبتمبر
conference
الماضي
that was held
بما
on the
يفتح
22nd of
الطريق
September
نحو
in a way
سلام
that would lead
عادل
towards
وتعاون
a just
إقليمي.
peace and
السيدات
regional cooperation.
والسادة
Ladies and gentlemen,
نقولها اليوم
today
بكل وضوح
we say clearly,
لن يتحقق السلام ما
peace
لم
cannot be
تتحقق
achieved
العدالة
if justice is not
ولن
achieved,
تكون هناك عدالة
and there can be
ما
no
لم
justice
تتحرر
if Palestine is not freed.
نريد أن نعيش بحرية
We
وأمن
want to
وسلام
live in
كبقية
freedom,
شعوب الأرض
security, and peace like
في
all
دولة
other people on
مستقلة
earth,
ذات
in
سيادة
an
على حدود
independent
67
sovereign state on the borders of
وعاصمتها القدس
1967,
الشرقية
with East Jerusalem
في أمن
as our capital,
وسلام مع
in
جيراننا.
security and peace with our
نريد دولة
neighbors. We
مدنية
want a
عصرية
modern civilian
خالية
state that is
من
free
العنف
of
والسلاح
violence,
والتطرف
weapons, and
تحترم
extremism,
القانون
one that
وحقوق
respects law,
الإنسان
human rights,
وتستثمر في
and
الإنسان
invests
والتنمية
in
والتكنولوجيا والتعليم
development, technology,
لا
and
في
education,
الحروب
not
والنزاعات.
in wars and conflict.
وقد آن الأوان لأن ينصف
The time
المجتمع
has come
الدولي
for the
الشعب
international
الفلسطيني
community to do right by the
لينال
Palestinian
حقوقه
people
المشروعة في
so that they
الخلاص
may
من
obtain
الاحتلال
their rightful,
ولا يبقى
their
رهينة
legitimate rights to
لمزاج
be rid
السياسة
of the occupation
الإسرائيلية
and to not remain a
التي
hostage
تنكر علينا
to the
حقوقنا
temperament of
الأساسية
Israeli politics,
وتواصل
which
الظلم
denies our
والقهر
rights and continue in their injustice, oppression, and aggression. We are continuing to move forward, and we will continue our peaceful, legal, and diplomatic fight to obtain our rights. In conclusion, we say to our sons and daughters in the homeland, in the exile, and in the diaspora, no matter how much our wounds bleed, and no matter how long the suffering lasts, it will not break our will to live and survive. The dawn of freedom will emerge, and the flag of Palestine will fly high in our skies as a symbol of dignity, steadfastness, and being free from the yoke of occupation. Palestine is ours. Jerusalem is the jewel of our heart and our eternal capital. We will not leave our homeland. We will not leave our lands. Our people will remain rooted like the olive trees, firm as the rocks. We will rise from under the rubble to rebuild and to send from our blessed and holy land messages of hope and the sound of truth and right, and build the bridges of just peace for the people of our region and the entire world. May the peace and mercy and blessings of God be upon you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank His Excellency Mahmoud Abbas, President of the State of Palestine. The Assembly will hear an address now by His Excellency Rashad Mohammed Al-Alimi, President of the Presidential Leadership Council of the Republic of Yemen. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful.
خطابي اليوم سيكون
My statement today
تحت عنوان
will be entitled
من أجل اليمن
For Yemen,
من أجل العالم.
for the world.
أصحاب الجلالة
Your
والفخامة والسمو
Majesties, Your Excellencies, Your
السيدة
Highnesses,
رئيس الجمعية العامة
Madam
للأمم
President of
المتحدة
the General Assembly of the
السيد
United
الأمين
Nations,
العام
Mr. Secretary General,
السيدات والسادة
ladies and
ممثلو الدول
gentlemen,
الأعضاء.
distinguished delegates.
في البداية تقدم للسيدة
I would first
أنالينا
like
بيربورغ
to offer Madam Annalena
ولبلدها
Baerbock
صديق
and her
جمهورية
friendly
ألمانيا
country, the Federal
الاتحادية
Republic of Germany.
بخالص
I'd like
التهاني
to offer them our
بانتخابها
sincere
رئيسا
congratulations
للجمعية العامة
on her
للأمم
election as
المتحدة.
President of the United Nations
أتمنى
General
لها كل
Assembly.
التوفيق
I wish
والنجاح
her success
بقيادة أعمال
in
هذه الدورة
leading this
التي نطمح
session,
وفق شعارها
which
إلى العمل معا
we
من أجل السلام
attach
والتنمية
great
وحقوق
importance
الإنسان.
to as under the
وأود
slogan
الثناء
Better
والإشادة
Together
أيضا
for Peace, Development
لجهود
and Human
الأمين
Rights.
العام
I would
للأمم
also like to
المتحدة
commend the efforts
في
of
أنطونيو
the Secretary General of the United
مع
Nations, Mr. Antonio
تطلعنا
Guterres.
العمل مع هذا
We look
الثنائي
forward to
على
working
رأس
with
المنظمة الأممية
these two leaders
من
of
أجل
the
الانتصار
United
للسلام
Nations to
وحقوق الإنسان في
champion
اليمن
peace and human rights
بما
in
في
Yemen,
ذلك توفير
and
الحماية
to offer
للموظفي
protection
الإغاثة
to the relief
المختطفين
staff that
من
have been
قبل
kidnapped
الميليشيات الحوثية
by
الإرهابية المدعومة من
terrorist
النظام
Houthi
الإيراني.
militias that are backed by the Iranian
كما
regime.
أغتنم هذه المناسبة
I also take this
لأتقدم
opportunity
بخالص
to
التهاني
offer our
إلى
sincere
أبناء شعبنا
congratulations
اليمني العظيم
to our great Yemeni
الذين
people
يحتفلون
who
هذا المساء
tonight are celebrating
ذكرى إسقاط
the
نظام الإمامة
anniversary of
العنصري
the
قبل
overthrow of
63
the
عاما
racist imamate
وميلاد النظام
regime
الجمهوري
63 years ago,
القائم على
and the
المبادئ
birth of the
الحرية
republic that is
والعدالة
based on the principles
وإزالة
of liberty,
الفوارق
justice,
والتمييز
and
بين
abolishing
الطبقات
differences and
ومشاركة
class
المرأة
discrimination,
وضمان
and
الحقوق
encouraging the
والحريات.
participation of women and guaranteeing rights
والسيدات
and
والسادة
liberties. Ladies
في
and
إطار هذه
gentlemen,
المؤسسة
Within
التي
this
جاءت على
organization,
أنقاض
which
حرب
was
مروعة
built in the aftermath
تعهدت
of a horrific
البشرية
war,
قبل 8 عقود
humanity 8 decades
ألا
ago
يترك
pledged
شعب
that
وحيدا
no people
أمام
would be left
الاستبداد أو
alone
الفوضى
to face dictatorship
أو
or
المجاعة
chaos or
دون
famine
سند
without the
للمجتمع
backing
الدولي.
of the international community.
تعهدتم
You
وتعهدنا معا
pledged and we pledged along
أن تكون هذه
that this
المؤسسة أمينة على
organization
الكرامة
will
الإنسانية
safeguard human dignity
وحق الشعوب في
and the
العيش
rights of
الكريم
peoples to
والأمن
live in
والتنمية
dignity,
والسلام.
security, development, and
واليوم
peace. And today,
وبعد كل تلك السنوات
after all these years have passed,
نحمل إليكم السؤال
we
المصيري ذاته من
pose
الشعب
to you
اليمني
the same hateful
حول ما إذا
question from the
كانت تلك
Yemeni
القيم
people, whether
ما
these
تزال حية
values and principles continue
وإلا ماذا
to
يعني أن يترك
exist or
بلدنا
not, or else what would it mean for our country
للمشروع
to be left
لمشروع النظام الإيراني التوسعي
hostage to the
وميليشياته
Iranian
التي
regime's
تستخدم الجوع
expansionist
كسلاح
schemes and its militias
والدين كأداة
that use hunger
والممرات
as a
البحرية كوسيلة
weapon,
ابتزاز.
religion as a tool, and
ماذا يعني
maritime
أن يتحول
passages
هذا
as a
البلد
means of
العريق
blackmail? What does it mean for
إلى
this
إحدى
country
أخطر
with an
بؤر
ancient
الإرهاب
history to become
العابر
one of the
للحدود
most
في العالم.
dangerous hotspots of terrorism,
لذلك
cross-border
نحن هنا
terrorism in the world?
ليس لي إعادة عرض مشهد
We are here
الصمود
today not simply
الأسطوري
to speak
للشعب
of
اليمني في
the epic
مواجهة أشد
confrontation
التنظيمات
of the
الإرهابية
Yemeni
عنفا
people
وصلبا
against
على
the
الإطلاق
violent and the most
وإنما
violent and
للبناء على
arrogant
ما
of
تحقق
terrorist
ودعوة
organizations.
العالم
At
هذه
all, rather,
المرة
we are here to build on
من
what was
أجل
achieved
الفعل
and to call on the
والتدخل
world once again to take
ومن أجل
action and not
الخلاص
simply to
الذي
take note,
وعدنا به
and
شعبنا
to achieve the
الاتكال.
salvation that we
السيدات
have
والسادة
promised our people, not simply
اليمن اليوم ليس
repetition
مجرد
of
أزمة
statements of
داخلية
the past. Ladies
بل
and
أصبح
gentlemen, Yemen today
اختبارا
is not simply a
لمصداقية
domestic
النظام
crisis,
الدولي
rather it is a test of the
وبعد
credibility of
أكثر
the
من عقد
international
على انقلاب
organization.
الميليشيات
After a
الحوثية على التوافق
decade
الوطني
has passed to
بدعم
the coup
من
that was
النظام
orchestrated
الإيراني
by the Houthi militias
يعيش
supported by
شعبنا
the Iranian regime
إحدى أكبر
against the
الأزمات
national
الإنسانية
consensus. Our people are living
ويواجه
one of the
تهديدات
greatest
أمنية
humanitarian
تتجاوز
crises,
حدوده إلى
facing
الإقليم
security
والعالم
threats
بأسره
that transcend our borders
ذلك أن
and spread to
الميليشيات
the region and the
الحوثية لم
entire
تعد تلك
world.
الجماعة
The Houthi
المتمردة
militias are no
في
longer a rebel
مساحة
group in a
نائية من البلاد
remote area in the
بل
country.
تنظيم
Rather, the
إرهابي
Houthi
عالمي
militias are an international
مجدد
terrorist organization armed to the teeth
إيرانية
with
متطورة
an advanced
من
Iranian
الصواريخ
arsenal,
البالستية
including
إلى
ballistic
الطائرات المسيرة
missiles and drones
والزوارق
and
المفخخة
booby-trapped boats
والألغام البحرية
and sea mines
والقذائف
and
الانشطارية
fissile
وأسلحة نوعية
projectiles
أخرى
and other
محرمة
qualitative
دوليا
weapons that are internationally banned.
وفوق ذلك
In
تدعم
addition,
هذه الجماعة المارقة
this outlaw
شبكات
group
تهريب المخدرات
supports networks that smuggle
وتوطين
drugs
تكنولوجيا جديدة في
and
التشويش
utilize new
والاتصالات
technologies to disrupt
والتوجيه
communications
في
and
مسعاها
guidance systems
لتحويل
in an
اليمن إلى
attempt to
مختبر
transform
لتجريب
Yemen into
الأسلحة
a
الداعمية
laboratory to experiment
هذه ليست
with the
مجرد
weapons of
أدوات
its
حرب
supporters. These are not simply
بل
tools of war.
مشروع لإعادة
Rather,
رسم
this is
خريطة
a
النفوذ
scheme to
الإيراني في المنطقة
redraw the map of Iranian
ومن
influence in the
يتهاون مع
region.
هذه
And
الجماعة
those who
اليوم
are lenient with this
عليه
group
أن
today
يتخيل كيف
must
سيكون
imagine how
غدا
tomorrow will be
عندما
when
يتحول البحر
the
الأحمر
Red Sea
والممرات
and
المائية
maritime
إلى
passengers
رهينة
fall
دائمة
prey
لهذا الإرهاب
permanently to this
لذلك
terrorism.
أيتها
Therefore,
السيدات أيها السادة
ladies and gentlemen,
أثبتت السنوات الماضية
the past years have
أن
proven
سياسة
that the
إدارة الصراع
policy of conflict management,
عبر المزيد من
by offering
الحوافز
more
لم
incentives,
تجلب سوى
has
مزيد
only
من
brought
الويلات والدمار
more disaster and
كما أن
destruction.
سياسة الاحتواء
Moreover, the policy of containment
منحت الميليشيات
has given the
الحوثية
Houthi
الوقت
militias the time
والموارد
and the
لتوسيع
resources
ترسانتها
to further expand its
وحين
arsenal.
عجزت الأمم
The United
المتحدة
Nations
عن
was
حماية
unable to
موظفيها
protect its
المختطفين
own
في
staff
صنعاء
who were kidnapped in
أو
Sana'a,
حماية المنشآت
unable
النفطية
to protect the
وسفن
oil
الشحن
installations
البحري
and the commercial
بدا واضحا
ships. It
أن
has
السلام
become clear
المنشود
that
لا
the peace
يمكن
we
أن
seek
يستجدع
cannot
بل
be
يفرض
asked for,
بالقوة.
but must be imposed by force.
السيدات والسادة
Ladies and gentlemen,
لقد بات واجبا اليوم على
it has
العالم
become incumbent upon the world
أن يعيد النظر في
to reconsider
تصوراته تجاه الحالة
its
اليمنية
position on the Yemeni
فمن جهة
situation.
هناك جبهة وطنية
On the one
واسعة
side, there is
تؤمن
a
بالشرعية
widespread national
الدولية
front that believes in
وتتبنى قيم
international
الشراكة
legitimacy and
والديمقراطية
adopts the values of
وتحافظ على
partnership and
التنوع
democracy
المحلي
and maintains local
والمشاركة
diversity
الشعبية
and popular
وتعمل
participation
على
and
بناء
works on
مؤسسات الدولة
building the institutions of
وهي
the state.
الجبهة التي
This is the
أمثلها
front
اليوم
that I represent
أنا
today,
وإخواني
myself
أعضاء
and
مجلس
my brothers, the
القيادة
members of the
والحكومة
Presidential Council and the
العضو
government,
في الأمم
which
المتحدة
is a member of the
نيابة
United Nations
عن جميع
and represents
اليمنيين
all
واليمنيات
Yemenis, men and women
وفي
alike.
المقابل
In
ثم
return,
تنظيم طائفي
we have
إقصائي
an exclusionary,
فاشي لا
sectarian,
يؤمن
fascist
بقواعد الشرعية
organization that does
الدولية
not believe in the principles of
ويمارس
international
الإرهاب
legitimacy
العابر للحدود
and which conducts
ويتبنى
cross-border
نموذجا
terrorism
قويا
and adopts an
ديمقراطيا
authoritarian
معاديا
theocracy
لحقوق الإنسان
that is opposed to
وهو ما
human rights,
تمثله جماعة
which is
الحوثي
embodied
وداعميه
by the Houthis
وللأسف
and their supporters.
فإن تغافل الكثيرين عن
Unfortunately,
جوهر
the disregard by
الأزمة
many of
شجع
the
الميليشيات
essence
الحوثية على
of the
التمادي
Yemeni crisis
نحو
has encouraged
تهديد
the
السلم
Houthi
الإقليمي
militias to
والدولي
go further in
واستهداف
threatening
مصادر
peace
الطاقة
regionally and
ثم ممرات
internationally, and
الملاحة
targeting
وصولا إلى
energy
اختطاف
sources and
موظفي
maritime
الأمم
passages,
المتحدة
and
والتنكيل
even kidnapping and abusing
السيدات
United
والسادة
Nations staff.
لقد
Ladies and
تحدثت
gentlemen, I've
إليكم
spoken
من
to
هذا
you
المنبر
from this
في
podium in the past,
مناسبات سابقة وقد
and at
أكدت
the
فيها
time,
أن حكومة
I
الجمهورية
asserted
اليمنية
that the government of the
مستعدة
Republic of
دوما
Yemen
لمد
is
يدها إلى سلام شامل
always ready
حتى وإن
to
اضطرت
embrace
إلى
a
تقديم
comprehensive peace,
تنازلات
even if
مؤلمة
that includes making
طالما
painful
كان
concessions,
ذلك
as
في
long
مصلحة
as
الشعب اليمني
they come in the interest of the
لكن
Yemeni
وبعد
people.
أن فشلت
However, and
مساعي
after our efforts
حفظ السلام
to maintain peace have
فإنه بات ضروريا
failed,
التحرك
it has
بصورة
become
جماعية
necessary to move
وحاسمة من
collectively and
أجل فرض
firmly
السلام
to impose peace.
وعليه فإنني أدعو
Therefore,
اليوم
I call on you today
إلى تشكيل
to
تحالف
form
دولي
an
فعال
effective
من أجل استعادة أمن
international
واستقرار اليمن
coalition to restore
تحالف
security
يعيد
and
بناء
stability to Yemen, a
المؤسسات للدولة
coalition that
الوطنية
would rebuild the
ويحرر البلاد
institutions
من
of the
قبض
state and would liberate
الميليشيات
the country
والجماعات
from the clutches
الإرهابية
of the
بكافة
militias and
أشكالها.
all forms of
السيدات والسادة
terrorist groups.
إن
Ladies and
الجمعية
gentlemen,
العامة
the
للأمم
United
المتحدة
Nations General Assembly,
وفي دورتها 80
in its
تبدو
80th
بأمس
session,
الحاجة إلى أن تثبت
seems to be in
لأعضائها
dire need to
بأن
prove to
القانون
its
الدولي
members that
ليس
international
مجرد
law
أسطورة
is not simply a
وأن
myth,
النظام
and
العالمي
that
القائم على
the
القواعد
rules-based
ليس مجرد
international
دعوة
order is not
انتقائية
simply a selective call.
ويظل اليمن
Yemen
وغزة
and Gaza,
في هذا السياق
in this
هما
context,
ساحة الاختبار
are
الأخلاقي
the moral testing
لهذه
ground
المؤسسة العريقة
of this important
وهما المسرح
organization.
الذي
They
يمكن من خلاله
are
تأكيد أن قوة الحق
the
ما
place
زالت
where
قادرة
we can
على
definitely
مواجهة
confirm that the
حق
might
القوة.
of right is still able to
وفي قلب
confront
هذه
the right of
المنطقة
might.
تأتي القضية الفلسطينية
And here,
باعتبارها
the
الجرح النازف في
Palestinian
ضمير
cause
الإنسانية
lies in the heart
وقضية العرب
of this
المركزية
issue as a
وهي
wound that
تشهد اليوم
continues to
تحولا
bleed,
تاريخيا
and
من
the
خلال
central
الاعتراف
cause
الكاسح
of the Arab
بدولتها
people,
المستقلة
which is now
التي
also
لا ننسى في
witnessing an
خضمها
important transformation. So the
توجيه عظيم
overwhelming
التقدير للأشقاء في
recognition
المملكة
of an
العربية
independent
السعودية
state. And
على
here we would like to
جهودهم
express our
الحميدة
sincere gratitude
مع
to our
الشركاء
brothers and sisters in
الفرنسيين
the Kingdom of Saudi
في
Arabia
انتزاع هذه
for their
المكاسب
efforts,
السياسية
along
غير
with
المسبوقة
their French partners,
كما
to achieve
نجددها
these
من هذا
unprecedented
المنبر
political gains. We'd also like to
دعمنا
confirm
الكامل
here
للسلطة
our
الوطنية
full support for
الفلسطينية
the Palestinian
وحل الدولتين
Authority
وفق
and the
قرارات
two-state
الشرعية
solution in
الدولية
accordance with
ومبادرة
international
السلام
diplomatic resolutions
العربية
and the Arab Peace Initiative.
وتدعو
And we
بقية
call
الدول
upon
الأعضاء
the rest
إلى
of the
الاعتراف
member
بها
states to
والانحياز
recognize
إلى حق شعبها وكرامته
Palestine and to
وفي ذات
support
الوقت
the rights of its
نجدد
people and
رفضنا
their dignity. And at the same time,
متاجرة
we
الميليشيات
reiterate
المارقة
our rejection of
لهذه
the use
القضية
by
العادلة
outlying militias of
التي لم
this
تجلب
just cause
لفلسطين
that
سوى
has
العزلة والخراب
as a trading card, which has
أصحاب
only brought
الجلالة
Palestine
والفخامة
more
والسمو
isolation and
في خضم
destruction.
هذه المعاناة
Your Majesties,
التي يعيشها
Excellencies, and
الشعب اليمني
Highnesses, in the
على
midst
مدى
of this
11
suffering of
عاما
the Yemeni people
لم
that has
يتركنا
lasted for 11
أشقاؤنا
years, our brethren have
وحدنا
not left us
وفي
alone,
المقدمة المملكة العربية
namely the Kingdom
السعودية
of Saudi
ودولة الإمارات
Arabia, the
العربية
United
المتحدة
Arab Emirates,
الذين
who
لم يحموا
have
فقط
not
الدولة
only
اليمنية
worked
من
to
الانهيار
protect the
بل
Yemeni
المنطقة
state
كلها
from
من
collapse,
السقوط في
but for the
قبضة
entire
المشروع
region
الإيراني
from falling into the
وقدموا
clutches of
نموذجا
the
عمليا
Iranian
للشراكة
scheme. They
الاستراتيجية معنا
have presented a
القائمة على
practical
التنمية وعلى العالم أن
model of
يتبنى هذا
strategic
النموذج
partnership
لا
based
أن
on
يكتفي
development. The world
بمراقبته
must adopt this model
نهاية
and not
الأسبوع الماضي
simply watch it.
بادر
At the
أشقاؤنا في
end of
المملكة
last
العربية
week, our
السعودية
brothers
مجددا
in the Kingdom of
إلى
Saudi Arabia once again
الإعلان عن دعم
announced
اقتصادي إضافي
additional
للموازنة
economic
العامة
aid
للدولة
to the country's
والخدمات
budget
الأساسية
and
في وقت
basic services
تواجه
at
فيه
a time
الحكومة
when the
اليمنية
Yemeni government is
اختناقات
facing
تمويلية حادة
extreme financial
وتتطلع من
bottlenecks.
المجتمع الدولي
And we hope
الالتحاق
that the
بهذا
international
الجهد
community
من
would
أجل
join this
بقاء
effort
ملايين
so that
اليمنيين
we could keep
على قيد
millions of
الحياة.
Yemenis alive.
سيد الرئيس السيدات والسادة
Mr.
كان
President, ladies
عنوان
and
بياننا
gentlemen, the
اليوم
title of my
من
statement
أجل
today
اليمن
was For
من أجل
Yemen,
العالم
for the world.
إذ أننا لا نناشدكم اليوم من
We
أجل
are
اليمن
not calling upon you today
فقط بل
to
من أجل
simply work
العالم
for
بأسره
Yemen, but for the entire world.
لا يترك اليمن فريسة للابتزاز
Yemen must
والإرهاب
not be left to fall
يعني فتح
prey
الباب
for
لمزيد من
blackmail
الضحايا
and terrorism, because this would mean
وبالتالي
opening
ضرب
the door to
مصداقية
more
هذه
victims,
المؤسسة
and this would deliver a blow to
ومبادئها
the
بالصمت
credibility of this
إنما
organization.
نطلبه من هذا الجمع
And
ليس
principles. What we ask from you are not new statements, but international action, firm international action to support the legitimate government as a trusted partner on the ground. The time has come to launch an international coalition that will liberate Yemen from terrorism and rebuild its national state, and would guarantee the security and the world, the security of the region and the world from the dangers of cross-border terrorism. And this is what we call for, to regain sovereignty in our country and put an end to the chapter of militias once and for all. I thank you, and peace and God's blessings be upon you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Presidential Leadership Council of the Republic of Yemen. The Assembly will hear now an address by Her Excellency Gordana Dzidzanovska-Davkova, President of the Republic of North Macedonia. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency and invite her to address the Assembly.
Почитувана председателке на Генералното собрание на Обединените нации, госпожа Алена Барбо, почитуван генерален секретар на Обединените нации, господин Гутереш, ексцеленции, дами и господа. Како темел на меѓународното право и мултилатерализмот, Обединетите нации спречија нова светска војна, превенираа бројни конфликти и ги убlažија последиците од многу хуманитарни кризи.
They have helped many nations embark on the path to sovereign equality, lifted millions of extreme poverty, and educated entire generations. They have inspired a global movement for rights and freedoms, for social justice and equality. They have raised awareness of environmental protection and mobilized humanity in the fight against climate change. For these and many other achievements, the United Nations, its agencies and leaders have won no less than 12 Nobel Peace Prizes. Nevertheless, the United Nations today face a geopolitical and geoeconomic earthquake that is shaking the foundations of the post-World War II order. Today's crisis stems from deep tectonic shifts, undermining the principles that shaped the world for the past 80 years. A new geopolitical era is emerging before our eyes. Instead of acting together on the urgent challenges such as peace and security, climate change and environmental destruction, artificial intelligence and growing inequalities, we seem to be heading towards a post-Hobbesian state of war of everyone against themselves. Instead of a single international order, parallel orders seem to be emerging, each with its own rules, values, and interests, often directly against one another. Being paralyzed and isolated when most needed, I wonder if the United Nations is turning into the League of Nations. The signs are all around us. Instead of creating a sense of shared future, humanity is facing wars and loss of humanness. With international humanitarian law increasingly ignored, hunger is weaponized and humanitarian work is targeted. Amid everyday violence, the world is oscillating between nihilistic pessimism and hedonistic escapism, between hopeless lamentation and heartless indifference, as in the first decades of the 20th century. The tremors of the international order have opened deep geopolitical fault lines. One of the most active is in Ukraine, where war has been raging for 3.5 years. Russia's aggression is a flagrant violation of the Charter of the United Nations and a direct threat to international peace and security. We also express our deep concern of the recent violations of the airspace of Poland, Romania, and Estonia. Every one of them are NATO member states. We supported the joint statement of September 12 and call for immediate de-escalation, full respect for international law, and use of preventive diplomacy to reduce tensions and preserve peace. Your Excellencies, the geopolitical fault line also runs through the Western Balkans region. The Macedonian accession process to the European Union has been continuously obstructed for 20 years, but not on the basis of objective Copenhagen criteria, but for subjective nationalistic reasons. The latest EU condition to start our negotiations is a new imposed amendment to the Constitution. the Constitution, lex superior, and in Rousseau's sense, a social contract between citizens, represents the most internal matter of any state. Our Constitution provides 4 initiators for amendments: the President of the Republic, the government, at least 30 members of parliament, and 150,000 citizens. It is clear that neither our neighbors nor the European Union are authorized proposers of amendments. We emphasize that conditioning the start of negotiations to new constitutional amendments once again reopens issues of history, culture, and language questions we have been assured were settled by the Prespa Agreement. We are constantly reminded that agreements must be respected. Pacta sunt servanda. We know, I agree, we note that the Treaty of Friendship, Good Neighborliness, and Cooperation with Bulgaria contains no provisions for constitutional amendments. Finally, through the Constitutive Act, the EU defines itself as a unity of diversity and commits to respecting cultural and linguistic diversity, national and cultural identity, and dignity and integrity. How then is it possible that we are asked to discuss and negotiate with a neighbor about history, culture, and language? Time and again, we stress that we perceive ourselves as Europeans and deeply believe in the European project that brought peace and economic prosperity after the Second World War. The European ideal remains our greatest inspiration and strategic aspiration. As a country dedicated to good neighborly relations and regional cooperation, we do not seek disputes with our neighbors. What we desire is to be integrated in the Union, but without additional conditions and with national dignity preserved. We warn that after the war in Ukraine, the blocked European integration of the Western Balkans is not only a political, but also a security issue. With the political door closed for the Western Balkan countries and the door wide open for influences of third geopolitical centers of power, it is ironic that the Union calls for resilience towards them. Must we end up on the Security Council's agenda for the EU to unblock enlargement? If the European Union wants to be a geopolitical union, it must not leave the Western Balkans in a geopolitical vacuum. As the President of the European Commission has noted, the European Union must break the armor of consensus as soon as possible if it wants to complete the reunification of Europe and become a strong geopolitical factor again. Madam President, esteemed Excellencies, finally, I cannot but not address one of the most geopolitically volatile regions, the Middle East and Gaza. The Middle East has an ancient and rich tradition of inter-religious and inter-ethnic coexistence. History has shown that diversity, when respected, can be a source of cultural enrichment and long-term peace. But also, history teaches that violence, regardless of its origin, deepens divisions, prolongs human suffering, and distances the parties from a just and comprehensive solution. We are convinced that sustainable peace in the Middle East can only be achieved through dialogue and diplomacy, in accord with international law. The inviolability of human life and dignity must be respected, even in times of war, in accord with international humanitarian law. In that spirit, we reaffirm our support for international efforts aimed at de-escalation, inclusive dialogue, and direct negotiations. Esteemed Excellencies, these geopolitical fault lines and tensions point unequivocally to the following. Without multilateral institutions and procedures, without international law and principles that would tame the strong and protect the weak, we will reenact the Thucydides Melian dialogue, with the strong doing what they can and the weak what they must. Consider
Pomislete na
how
toleriranje na
repeated
brojnike
violations of
povredi
the
na
United
poveljata
Nations
na
Charter
Ujedinite
were
nacije,
tolerated,
što
clearing
otvorja
the
pad
path
za
for
novi
new
povredi.
ones. Remember
Setite
the
se na
General Assembly
neimplementiranje te
resolutions left
rezolucije na generalno
unenforced,
собрание,
the
na
International Court
nesprovedenite
of Justice's
presude i ignoriranje te
judgments
mišljenja na
disregarded and
međunarodni
its
odsud na
opinions
pravdata,
ignored,
na mirovnite napori
and the
blokirani
peace
u Sovetu
initiatives
za
obstructed
bezbednost.
in the Security Council.
Suočeni su
Facing with the
nefunkcionalnostima
dysfunction of the
aktuelnog
current international
međunarodnog
order,
poredak, njihovi
some
realisti
realists advise
sovetuva da
forgetting
zaboravime na
international
međunarodni
treaties and
dogovori i
conventions
konvenciji kako
as
da
a
ne
needless
potreban
burden
tovar i da
and
se
seeking
zasolune
shelter
vo
in
regionalnite
regional blocs and
blokovni
alliances.
sojuzi. Za njih,
Them,
krizite
the
najbrzo i
fastest and
najdublje
best
se
way to
rešava
resolve
na
crisis
Odboru
is
za
outside
Ujedinite
the United
nacije,
Nations
bez
without
mandata
a
Soveta za
Security Council
bezbednost.
mandate.
No,
However,
odstępowanie
departing
to
from
od
universal
uniwerzalnych
principles and
principi i
mechanisms
mechanizmi,
in favor of
populsa na
pragmatic
pragmatični
opportunism and
oportunizam i
reaching for
poseganie
ad
to po ad
hoc
hoc
measures
merki ne
pushes
turka
us towards
ko
an
neizvesna
uncertain
idnina
future
na
of
rastući
growing geopolitical
geopolitički i
and geoeconomic
geoekonomski
competition
nadprevar,
and
pa
even
duri i vo
confrontation in the
konfrontacija vo
race
trkata
for
za resursi.
resources.
Zarem tako
Is
surov
that
svet
the
koji
harsh world
stavime na
we mean
našite
to leave to
potomci?
our posterity?
Alternativa je da se
The
obireme da go
alternative is to try to
revitalizirame
revitalize
multilateralizmom i
multilateralism
da gi
and
napravime
make its
negovite
institutions more
institucije
resilient
otporni na
to these
sistemske
systemic
pogresi.
shocks.
Počituvani,
Respected Madam President,
ceneti prisutni,
respected
mladite
attendees,
generacije
young
ima
generations
pravo
have
na
the right to a
obnovena povelba,
renewed
na
charter, to
reformirani
reformed
silni
and
objedinjeni
strong
naciji,
United Nations
što ki im
that will
ovozmože
enable them
živeti
to
vo
live in
mir
peace among
međunarodnite,
nations
no i
and
vo mir so
peace with
prirodata.
nature.
Tije
These
reforme
reforms
ne
must not
smeja
be
da bude
cosmetic,
kozmetički,
but
podlabuki,
profound,
za da
to enable
ovozmožat
greater
pogolema
inclusiveness,
inkluzivnost,
harmonization
harmonizacija među
between values
vrednosti
and
i
mechanisms,
mehanizmite,
optimization of
optimizacija na
national and
nacionalnih i
global
globalnih
interests,
interesi,
and
silni
functional
i
institutions.
funkcionalni instituciji.
The
Reformite
UN
na
reforms
Ujedinite
depend on
nacije
whether they are
zavisa
seen
od
as an
toga
opportunity
da li
to
na njih se
renew
gleda kako na
the
možno za
rules-based
obnova na
international
međunarodni
order
poredak temeljen na pravu i pravila
or
ili kako
as a challenge
osporuvanje
to the
na
privileges of some
privilegijite
member
na
states.
nekoj zemlji členki. No,
Yet,
koja
what
je
is the point of
poentata
being a
da se
privileged
bide
member state
privilegirana zemlja
of a
členka na
dysfunctional,
nefunkcionalna, nerelevantna,
marginalized
marginalizirana
international
međunarodna
organization?
organizacija? Za
For
efektivnije
effective
objediniti
United
naciji
Nations, it
potrebno
is
je da se
necessary for
reformira
the
Sovet
Security
za
Council
bezbednost,
to be
za da
reformed,
bide
to
poinkluziven,
be more inclusive,
poočeten i
accountable,
poodgovoren
and
za održavanje
responsible for
to na
maintaining
međunarodni
international
okvir
peace and security.
bezbednosti. Generalno
General
to
Assembly
sobranije
must
mora
evolve
da preraste
into
vo
a
predstavnički
representative
organ
policy-making body
za
rather
kreiranje
than a
politike,
debate club.
namjesto da ostane debaten klub.
The
Implementacijata
implementation
na
of
presudite na
International Court of
međunarodni
Justice
odsud na
judgments
pravdata
must
mora da stane
become
zadolžiteljna
mandatory
za
for
site
all
zemlje
member
členki,
states, ensuring the
obezbeduvajki
rule
vladenja na
of
pravoto.
international law.
Reforma ta je
Reform is
potrebna
needed
ne
not
samo
only
zaradi
for all
starite,
challenges,
tuku
but
i
also
zaradi
for new
novite
ones.
predizvici. Veštačka
Artificial intelligence
inteligencija nosi
brings
ogromni
enormous
možnosti,
opportunities,
no i
but
nesogledljivi
also
rizici za našu
incalculable risks for
civilizaciju.
our
Ta
civilization.
nije
It
običan
is not
tehnološki
just a
skok.
technological leap.
Njezino to
Its
vlijanje
impact may
može
be
da
greater
bude
than the
i pogolemo
industrial and
od
digital
industrijskata
revolutions.
i digitalna revolucija. Svi smo
Aware
za
of
ovaj.
this,
Moja
my
ta
country
državi i
and
jas
I
go
support
podržuvame
the
predlog
proposal to make
veštačka
artificial
inteligencija da bude
intelligence a
jedan od
priority of
prioriteta
the
na
80th
80. sedmica.
session.
Slednata
Next
godina,
year,
ke
we will
birame nov
elect a new
generalni
Secretary
sekretar
General
na
of the United
Objedinite
Nations.
naciji.
We
Potrebna
need
mi je
a
ličnost
person with
so liderski
leadership
veštini,
skills,
so
with
bogato
rich diplomatic
diplomatsko iskustvo,
experience, and
so
ability
sposobnost
to
da gi
bring
premostiva
differences
različite i da
and
gradi
build
konsensus,
consensus,
no i da
but
bide
also
dlaboko
deeply
humana
humane
i
and
posvetena
committed
na
to the vulnerable.
ranljivite.
The
Idni od
next
prv
top
diplomat na
diplomat of the
svetu
world must
mora da
possess
ima mnogo
knowledge,
znanje, trpenja i
patience,
tak.
and tact.
Po 80 godini
After
od
8
osnovanja
years,
to,
It is
krajno vreme
high
je za
time
žena
for a
generalni
woman to be a
sekretar na
Secretary General of the
Objedinite
United
naciji.
Nations.
Vo
In a
svet
world
dominiran
dominated
od
by
silni
strong
maži,
men,
često
often with
so oružje,
weapons, we
potrebni mi
need
se
strong
silni
women
ženi so
with
mudrost
wisdom
i
and
empatija.
empathy.
Verujem
believe
deka
that
ženite, koji
who
zajedno
are,
so decata,
along with their
se
children, are the
najgolemite i
greatest and
najbrojni
most
žrtvi na
numerous
vojnite,
victims of wars,
ima
have
neotuđivo
an
pravo i
inalienable
obvrska
right and
da posegnat
obligation to
kolivna
prevent them.
prevencija.
The
Anarhični
anarchic
međunaroden
international order
poredak je
is a
zakana
threat
za
to
site,
all,
a
but
najmnogu
especially
za
to small
malite državi.
states. It is
Prirodno je
natural
malite i
for
srednji državi
small
da
and
bidat
medium-sized
najgolemite
states to be the
podržuvači
greatest
na
supporters
reformite
of the
novih
United Nations
naciji.
reforms.
Cenite ekscelenciji,
Distinguished excellencies,
dozvolite da
let me share with you
podelam
what
što
we
pravi
are
na
doing.
Nijen.
Macedonian
Makedonskite građani
citizens are
bitelji
already
čuствуват
experiencing the
последиците od
consequences of
klimatskата
the climate
kriza,
crisis,
kako što
such
se
as extreme
ekstremните
weather conditions.
vremenski uslovi. Zato
is
na
why we supported the
COP29 во
implementation of the
Баку
Paris
го
Agreement at
поддржавме спроведувањето на
COP29
Парискиот
in
договор.
Baku.
Ја поддржавме
We supported
обврската
the
од
Sevilla
Севиља за
commitment
финансирање
on
на
financing
развојот
for
и ги
development and
интегриравме
integrated the
целите за
sustainable
одржлив
development
развој
goals in
во
our
нашата
national
национална
development
развојна
strategy
стратегија 2024-2044. На третата
third
конференција
UN
на
Ocean
Обединетите
Conference
нации
in
за
Nice,
океанот во Ница се
we
заложивме
committed
за
to
силно
strong
меѓународно
international
управување
ocean
со
governance,
океаните,
supporting
поддржувајќи
the
го
action plan.
акцискиот план.
We are
Вложуваме
making
големи
great
напори за
efforts to
промоција
promote
на
women's
женското
leadership
лидерство
and the
и
implementation
имплементацијата на
of the
агендите
agenda
за
on
жените,
women,
мирот и
peace and
безбедноста.
security.
Ја
We
подпишавме
signed
новата
the new
рамка за соработка со Обединетите нации
2026-2030 framework for cooperation with the United Nations
2026-2030 заради
to ensure
обезбедување на
inclusive
инклузивен,
social and
социјален и
human
човечки
development,
развој,
sustainable
одржлива економија
economies and
и
decent
достојна
work,
работа, отпорно и
resilient
зелено
and green
општество
societies
и
and
екосистеми,
ecosystems, the rule
владење
of
на
law
правото и
and
добро
good
управување.
governance.
Почитувани,
Esteemed
пред
Excellencies,
голем
we are
испит сме.
standing in front of a
Или
great
ќе го
test.
гарантираме
Either we will
меѓународниот
guarantee an
поредок
international
врз
order based on
визионерски
visionary
принципи,
principles,
или ќе
or we will
итаме
rush towards a
кон
catastrophe
катастрофа со
of
несогледливи
unimaginable
размери за
proportions
човештвото.
for humanity.
Поранешниот
Former
генерален
Secretary General
секретар
Dag
Даг
Hammarskjöld
Хамершелд подсети
reminded
дека
us that the
Обединетите
United
нации
Nations was not
не се
created
формирани за
in
да не
order to
однесат
bring
во
us to
рајот,
heaven,
туку за да не
but in order to
спасат
save
од
us from
пеколот.
hell.
Треба
should
да ги
recognize the
препознаеме
United Nations for
Обединетите
what it
нации
is.
за она што се.
An
Навистина
admittedly
несовршен,
imperfect,
но
but
неопходен
indispensable
инструмент на
instrument
нациите
of
во
nations
работењето за
in working
мирна
for peaceful
еволуција
evolution
кон
towards a more
поправеден и
just and
побезбеден
secure
светски
world
поредок.
order.
Да им ја
Let's
дадеме
give them
таа
that
шанса.
chance.
Благодарам.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Macedonia. L'Assemblée va entendre l'allocution de son Excellence, Monsieur Anthony Frank Laurent Saint-Cyr, président du Conseil présidentiel de transition de la République d'Haïti. J'ai pris le protocole de vouloir l'accompagner, son Excellence, qui j'invite à prendre la parole devant l'Assemblée.
Madame la Présidente de l'Assemblée générale,
Madam President of the General
Monsieur le
Assembly,
Secrétaire général,
Secretary General,
Excellences, Mesdames, Messieurs les chefs
distinguished
d'État et de
heads of
gouvernement,
state and government,
Mesdames, Messieurs les chefs de
distinguished
délégation,
heads of delegation,
distingués délégués. C'est avec
distinguished
gravité
delegates,
et beaucoup
it's with
d'espoir
a
que je
sense
porte
of
la voix
gravity and
d'Haïti,
a great deal of
les
hope that
salutations
I
d'un
convey
peuple
the voice
digne
of
et
Haiti
résilient,
and the
qui
greetings
malgré les
of a
épreuves
dignified and resilient
revendique pour
people,
lui-même,
which,
pour
despite
l'humanité
hardships,
entière,
is claiming
trois
for itself
promesses
and for all of
universelles.
humanity three
Le développement,
universal
le
promises:
respect de la dignité
development,
humaine et
respect
la
for
paix.
human dignity, and
La
peace.
paix qui est aujourd'hui
Peace,
l'urgence absolue
which
du
is
peuple
now
haïtien.
an absolute
Au nom de ce
imperative for the
peuple,
Haitian
je vous
people.
adresse, Madame
On
la
behalf of this
Présidente,
people,
mes plus sincères
Madam
félicitations pour
President,
votre
I would like
élection
to
à la tête
warmly
de cette
congratulate
Assemblée.
you on your election as
J'exprime
President of
également ma
this Assembly.
gratitude
I also
au
would like
secrétaire
to thank
général
Secretary
Antonio
General
Guterres,
Antonio
son
Guterres
engagement
for his
indéfectible en
unwavering
faveur de notre
commitment to our
organisation et son
organization
soutien
and his
constant
constant
et
and
multiforme
multifaceted
à la
support
République
for the
d'Haïti.
Republic of Haiti.
Mesdames, Messieurs,
Ladies
le
and
thème de cette
gentlemen,
session,
the theme of this
Mieux
session,
ensemble,
Better Together,
80 ans
80
et
years
plus
and
pour
more
la
for
paix,
peace,
le
development,
développement et
and
les droits de
human
l'homme,
rights,
honore l'œuvre
honors
remarquable
the
accomplie au
outstanding
fil des
work
décennies.
carried out over the
Il
past
rappelle aussi
decades.
l'impératif de
It
rester
also
unis et
recalls the
résilients
importance of
face aux
remaining
crises sans
unified and
précédent qui
resilient in the
menacent
face
l'avenir
of
de la
the
planète,
unprecedented
la
crises
paix et la
threatening the
sécurité
future of the
internationale.
planet, as well as international
Aujourd'hui,
peace and
la
security.
faim menace des
Today,
millions de vies.
hunger is
Les conflits
threatening
armés se
millions of
multiplient
lives.
et
Armed
l'extrême
conflicts are
pauvreté
multiplying and
s'intensifie,
extreme poverty is
provoquant des
deepening,
migrations
causing
forcées
forced
qui ébranlent
migrations
la
that
stabilité
jeopardize
internationale
international
et qui mettent à
stability
l'épreuve la
and
solidarité
that
des
puts
nations.
solidarity between nations
À
to
ces
the
défis
test.
s'ajoutent les changements
In addition to these
climatiques,
challenges,
la montée du
we also are
terrorisme,
dealing with
les
climate
atrocités de
change, a
masse,
rise of
la
terrorism,
criminalité
mass atrocities,
transfrontalière, le recul des droits
transnational
humains,
crime,
la
the erosion of
désinformation.
human rights, and
On ne peut
disinformation.
fermer les
We
yeux
cannot
sur
turn a
l'urgence
blind
de
eye
renforcer le
to the
système de
urgent
santé,
need to strengthen
d'assurer
our
une
healthcare
transition
systems, to
énergétique
ensure
juste
just
et de
energy
promouvoir
transition, and to
l'égalité de
promote
genre et
gender
l'inclusion des
equality and youth inclusion.
Ces enjeux appellent nous
These issues require us, the world leaders, to shoulder our responsibility to build a UN that is better adapted to the challenges of today and the hopes of tomorrow. We must ensure that all of our actions, including technological breakthroughs such as artificial intelligence, foster peace, development, and human dignity. Ladies and gentlemen, just a 4-hour plane ride from here, a human tragedy is unfolding, one of the most devastating of our hemisphere. Every day, innocent lives are extinguished by bullets, fire, fear. Entire neighborhoods are disappearing, forcing more than 1 million people into internal exile and annihilating memories, investment, and infrastructure. Thousands of children have been deprived of their fundamental right to education. Thousands of young people are condemned to despair. Hundreds of women and girls have been raped, and they will forever carry the scars of this violence in their bodies and souls. Almost half of the population is facing acute food insecurity. The healthcare system is collapsing. Hospitals are being vandalized, burned, or forced to shut down. Doctors are fleeing. Lives are being lost due to a lack of treatment. Even the treatment for persons with HIV and tuberculosis is under threat. This is the face of Haiti today, a country at war, a modern-day Guernica, a human tragedy at the doorstep of America. Only a 4-hour flight from here. It's important to say this. Haiti is experiencing a war between criminals that want to impose violence as a social order and a population, an unarmed population that is fighting for human dignity and freedom. The response must be firm and determined. Today, the international community must stand alongside Haiti and take large-scale measures, not half steps. A strong, coordinated, and immediate action is needed. Silence and inaction are not an option. We must act quickly to protect lives, to protect the innocence of children, to provide youth with a future, and to allow citizens to decide their own future at the voting booth. Every minute lost means human lives sacrificed and an erosion of democracy. Haiti wants peace. Haiti expects peace. Haiti has the right to peace. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, peace today is the most pressing need of the Haitian people. It is the raison d'etre behind our tireless battle, the battle between our security forces, led by our security forces and the multinational security support mission. Many policemen and soldiers have fallen in the war against criminal groups. We pay tribute to these heroes, Haitian and Kenyan, who have laid down their lives for their commitment to restoring peace and security in Haiti. Today, out of the 2,500 troops initially required and promised, there are only 1,000 members of the multinational mission on the ground. Their courage, combined with our own efforts, have not been sufficient to contain the security crisis. And yet we have increased by 40% the budget for our security forces. We've recruited new members. We have strengthened our troops and acquired more material and equipment. We must face the reality. Haiti is at the epicenter of an unprecedented regional threat. Powerful and heavily armed criminal networks are trying to destabilize our country and take over the economies of our entire common space. The new front lines of this battle are in our country, in Haiti. If we lose this battle on our soil, it will be futile to try to contain it in the rest of the region. That is why we must show the same determination, the same resolve, and the same unity that we showed in the fight against terrorism. Haiti cannot, could never overcome this challenge single-handedly. Today, it is crucial to mobilize a strong force with a clear mandate and with adequate material, logistical, and financial resources. In this regard, the lessons of the MMS and recommendations of Haitian experts must be taken into account. We also need heightened international cooperation based on intelligence sharing and on rigorous border control to curb the flow of arms, ammunition, drugs, and financing toward these gangs. Peace cannot be restored unless our regional partners take concrete measures to ensure their territories do not serve as a starting point or a transit hub for this kind
kind of trafficking. Approaches that failed yesterday will not save Haiti today. It is critical to listen to the voice of the Haitian people to try new solutions that are stronger and more adapted to the realities on the ground. In this regard, we fully support the efforts made to transform the multinational security support mission. We also call for solidarity from the entire international community, especially for the commitment of members of the Security Council for a vote in favor of the resolution establishing a gang suppression force. That is why I would like to express on behalf of the Haitian people my profound gratitude to the United States and to Panama for this initiative, the implementation of which will mark a turning point in our fight against insecurity, which is suffocating our nation. I thank the administration of President Trump for the efforts made to provide support and resources in our common fight against the gangs, these enemies that are threatening both Haiti and the entire region. Today, the complexity of the Haitian crisis cannot serve as a pretext for endless talk, for drawn-out negotiations, or for stalemates caused by geopolitical considerations. Every day that we hesitate, criminal groups benefit. We urgently need to be proactive, to transcend divisions, to act together, to promote the values that bring us together, peace and human dignity. Haiti would welcome the holding of a high-level meeting to overcome obstacles and to make tangible progress. In this regard, we welcome the countries of the region and thank them for their constant support, especially through declarations in various regional organizations, including the Coalition of American States and CARICOM. We appreciate their support and advocacy with partners in the Security Council for a real solution to the security crisis in Haiti. We also pay tribute to all of those states which during previous crises stood by our side and expressed the hope to be able to count once again on their commitment. Together, we can and we must resolve this crisis which has lasted for too long already. 12 million women, men, and children are expecting this of us. Ladies and gentlemen, the Presidential Transition Council was born of a political consensus that stemmed from intense negotiations between the nation's political parties. This council, establishment was supported by various international partners and facilitated by leaders of CARICOM, has a clear agenda which centers on holding free and credible elections. I repeat, free and credible elections. Despite the many challenges caused by the security crisis, the electoral process for which the PTC and the government have shown real political will has made real headway. The Electoral Council, Provisional Electoral Council, has already identified more than 85% of the voting centers, mobilized more than 70% of the elections personnel, and national financing to the tune of $65 million is guaranteed. The Presidential Transition Council is working closely with the MMS, the OAS, CARICOM, and BNU to ensure free, transparent, and inclusive elections reflecting the sovereign will of the Haitian people and guaranteeing the full and effective participation of young people, women, people with disabilities, and marginalized groups. To ensure productive political cooperation, constant efforts are being made and will continue to expand dialogue with the various political parties to strengthen consensus and to prevent a power vacuum which would be fatal for democracy and stability. The Haitian people must be able to choose its own leaders. The state wants credible elections. Our greatest challenge remains restoring security. The urgent and solemn call that we have once again issued to resolve the security crisis in Haiti must not be left to languish on paper nor be lost amid rhetoric and unkept promises. In Haiti, peace can no longer wait. Ladies and gentlemen, the transitional period does not allow us to launch all of the major structural reforms the country needs, but the humanitarian crisis we are currently experiencing must be overcome. To this day, the Haitian state has provided 72% of emergency assistance for IDPs and is assisting families to relocate. We are profoundly grateful to our international partners that have assisted us in the humanitarian response, and we are keenly interested in the promising initiatives put forward by those which, like the Association of Caribbean States, have chosen to join our effort. But our strategy is not limited to immediate assistance. We must move from assistance to investment. To this end, the government is determined to develop two major economic hubs, the Great North and the Great South, based on strategic sectors such as agro-industry, textiles, renewable energy, tourism, and services. Haiti will continue to count on its key partners to weather this difficult period and to relaunch its economy. We call for their support through the establishment of concrete mechanisms such as the renewal of the Hope Help Law or launching urban renovation projects, which will allow us to create jobs, to put an end to the humanitarian impasse, and to reduce migration pressure on Haitians in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, 2025 marks the bicentennial of the order forcing Haiti to pay a ransom for recognizing its own independence. We call for reparations, not out of bitterness or vengefulness, but out of a desire for justice and truth. We delivered with satisfaction the statement by the French presidency recognizing the need to open spaces for dialogue and historic truth, as well as the resolution of June 5, 2025 of the French National Assembly recognizing the injustice of this ransom. Haiti has established a National Reparations and Restitution Committee. We call for this progress to be accompanied by concrete action. France, which is the cradle of human rights, today has the opportunity to write a new chapter in its history with Haiti by honoring the ideals of freedom, equality, and fraternity that unite us. Ladies and gentlemen, I must underscore the invaluable support provided by the Haitian diaspora throughout the world, who are often living in hardship, whether in America, in Europe, in Africa, or elsewhere. The millions of Haitians living abroad contribute to the development of Haiti. We are undergoing a multidimensional crisis, and we call for the patience and understanding from our partners and friends so that our nationals are always treated with respect and dignity. Behind every migrant, there is a face, a family, a history, and a contribution to be made to their new country of residence. Haiti reaffirms its commitment to dialogue and to bilateral cooperation in the spirit of neighborliness and mutual respect to identify balanced and long-term solutions to Haiti's problems. The safe and orderly circulation of goods and of people, especially through air transport, is crucial for a shared future and common prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, the Haiti of tomorrow deserves peace and prosperity, a future based on independent judiciary, universal education, affordable health care for all, and an economy that provides every citizen with the same chance at success. This future also requires bold reforms, independent justice, and an end to impunity. On April 16, 2025, we enacted a decree establishing two specialized judiciary bodies, one to litigate crimes and complex financial infractions, and another to prosecute mass atrocities and sexual violence. We're making progress toward making these bodies operational. We are prepared to continue down this path. This is not the time for Haiti fatigue. The international community does not have the right to turn away from Haiti's situation. In light of this crisis, silence would not be neutrality, it would be complicity. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to pay tribute to the Haitian people. Representing them here is the greatest honor of my life. Beyond my functions as president of the Presidential Transition Council of Haiti, I am a real, active Haitian citizen with a profound love for my homeland, a land of freedom and dignity, a land of courage and talent. Haiti is not a nation that has given up. We are a great people, a people that stands together, men and women who have sacrificed for their homeland and for humanity. Haiti is not a playground for armed criminals, but rather it is a nation on its feet, comprised of dignified, resilient families who every day, despite terrible adversity, are fighting for a better future. I pay tribute to my fellow countrymen and women who are, without a doubt, among the most resilient people on earth. They deserve better. Giving them new hope is my only mission, and that is why now I call upon you to stand side by side with Haiti. We must build peace in Haiti, for the Caribbean, for the Americas, for all of humanity. Thank you.
Au nom de l'Assemblée générale, je tiens à remercier le président du Conseil présidentiel de transition de la République d'Haïti.
The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Mikhail Kabalashvili, President of Georgia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly. I can see it here. Yeah.
Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I represent a country with a 3,000-year history, the cradle of one of the world's most ancient civilizations and the brave Georgian people, filled with pride and dignity, a country that possesses a unique alphabet, an ancient language, and 17th century-long Christian traditions. The history of Georgia is a continuous chronicle of our people's struggle for survival against invaders, through which we have miraculously managed to preserve our cultural identity, traditions, and national character. Despite centuries of continuous warfare with invaders, the cultural environment in Georgia has always been distinguished by exceptional humanism, tolerance, and compassion for others, tolerance, openness to others, harmonious coexistence and diversity form the cornerstone of our ancient culture, which is brilliantly reflected in Georgian polyphony, in our national traditions, and in the world-renowned Georgian epic Shota Rustaveli's The Knight in the Panther's Skin. Georgia is a place where throughout history, no human has ever been oppressed or persecuted on ethnic or religious grounds. Quite the opposite. We have always been known for our profound sense of justice. I represent the Georgian people who know both the cost of war and the value of freedom and peace, a people who cherish their rich history and traditions, while at the same time facing with resolve the challenges that lie before our country. Amid a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape and unprecedented global challenges, such as ongoing conflicts, climate change, ideological polarization, cultural alienation, and war-driven humanitarian crisis, Georgia stands firmly as a guardian of dialogue, peace, stability, and sustainable development. Despite the many challenges surrounding us, we have managed to ensure the security of our people. The fundamental philosophy of the Georgian government remains to preserve peace, and no matter the cost, to spare our people from war. For the fourth year now, a horrific, bloody war has been raging in Ukraine, bringing catastrophic consequences and immense human suffering. Drawing on the bitter experience of the 2008 war, whose wounds have not yet healed for the Georgian people, we understand better than many the pain that Ukrainian nation endures today. Now, as before, Georgia expresses its firm and unwavering support for the Ukrainian people. As we deeply understand the importance of peace, Georgia contributes to the transformation of the South Caucasus and strives to turn it from a zone of conflict into a space of dialogue among civilizations and economic prosperity. We welcome President Donald Trump's peace initiative between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as well as his efforts to bring the bloody war between Russia and Ukraine to an end soon. Georgia has always supported and actively strived to establish sustainable and long-term peace in the South Caucasus, as well as to deepen trust and cooperation amongst its neighbors. For centuries, our country has been at crossroads of civilization and the space for dialogue among diverse cultures. Today, Georgia is reclaiming its historical role. Close relations with the countries of the South Caucasus and Central Asia, existing agreements with the European Union, and the Georgia's key position in the Middle Corridor, all give our country a special significance, both within the region and across the Eurasian continent. Georgia is the shortest connecting route and natural bridge between Europe and Asia, the West and the East. Thanks to our geographical location and pragmatic foreign policy, Georgia is emerging as a multi-dimensional and multifunctional regional hub, both in terms of trade and energy transit. Georgia makes a significant contribution to the development of the Middle Corridor strategic route and does everything to ensure that the corridor becomes the fastest, most reliable, and most stable connecting route between East and West. We are actively working with international investors, developing infrastructure and facilitating the creation of new energy transit routes, all of which ultimately enhance the connectivity between Asian and European markets. Within the framework of the Middle Corridor and its development, Georgia has launched strategically significant projects aimed at increasing the volume and intensity of rail, sea, and air transportation. Among them, the railway modernization project has already been completed, while work is actively underway on the deep sea port in Anaklia, the new international airport in Tbilisi, and the Black Sea submarine cable project. These projects, on one hand, provide landlocked countries in Central Asia and the South Caucasus with maritime connectivity to the rest of the world. On the other hand, the projects are implementing health diversity energy routes. We are implementing health diversity energy routes, thereby significantly enhancing the energy security of Europe and South Caucasus. To promote the development of the Middle Corridor and enhance connectivity between the two largest markets, Asia and Europe, Georgia has been hosting the Tbilisi Silk Road Forum for 8 years. It is an international platform for dialogue and new opportunities, attended up to 2,000 delegates from 60 countries. Our goal is to develop constructive relations based on mutual respect and shared benefits with major economies such as the United States, China, European Union, and others. We are open to any dialogue and cooperation, but at the same time, we demand respect and fair and dignified approach. What the Georgian people will never accept is being spoken to in the language of ultimatums, blackmail, or intimidation. Georgia is a faithful adherent to the fundamental principles or values of the United Nations and a dignified, responsible member of the international community, as evidenced by the considerable efforts by the current government of Georgia to improve the protection of human rights. It is precisely thanks to the pragmatic and rational policies of the government of Georgia that we have maintained peace and economic growth, significantly improving the quality of life of our citizens. Despite numerous challenges in recent years, Georgia has demonstrated remarkable resilience to external shocks. The positive trajectory of Georgia's development is reflected in and confirmed by the international rankings and indicators of the world's most reputable organizations. Despite 20% of Georgia's territory remaining under occupation, we continue to pursue development and progress with great energy and determination. We are entrusted with the mission that our children may live in a stronger, dignified Georgia and peaceful world. And now I want to address our possession brothers and sisters on the other side of the occupation line. For centuries, we have written Georgia's history together, a history filled with the heroism of our ancestors through our shared struggle for survival of our nation and the love for our motherland. We have never been a large empire imposing its rules on the others. We have always been a country proud of its diversity. Georgia is a place where civilizations have met, blended and balanced each other for centuries. Our culture is the very product of this complex and enduring synthesis. My Abkhaz and Ossetian brothers and sisters, our cultural code has not changed. For us, diversity is not a problem. It remains an essential formula for our existence, which is why we always meet our compatriots from the other side of the occupation line with open hearts and outstretched hands. It's our duty through joint efforts to overcome artificially created obstacles, rebuild broken bridges, and leave past grievances to history. As a people of exceptional patience and resilience, I believe that one day we will, together with our children, we will live with our children in a united, happy, and developed Georgia, where nothing will stand in the way of our harmonious coexistence. Herewith, I would like to express my gratitude to the international community for its unwavering support of Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Georgia, like the entire world, is going through a pivotal moment in modern history. We live in a transitional era where the future of the international order remains uncertain. The United Nations must ensure our planet's transition to a peaceful, stable, and fair, multipolar international order. Georgia is responsible, as a responsible member of international community, is ready to support the United Nations in becoming the inevitable alternative to war and the principal guarantor of peace. I would like to reiterate that we are prepared and open, taking into account our national interests, to engage in dialogue with all parties on issues of global and regional significance. The current reality requires us to face difficult issues and initiate an open, pragmatic, and result-oriented dialogue. I believe that only in this way we can overcome common global challenges and unlock new opportunities for the benefit of our countries, peoples, and future generations. Thank you very much for your attention. May God bless humanity.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of Georgia. La Asamblea escuchará ahora un discurso del excelentísimo señor Luis Alberto Arce Catacora, Presidente Constitucional del Estado Plurinacional de Bolivia. Pido a protocolo que acompañe a su excelencia, a quien invito a dirigirse a la Asamblea.
Muy buenos días.
A very good morning to all of you.
Permítame expresar un fraternal saludo a la Presidenta de la Asamblea General de Naciones Unidas, Annalena Baerbock, y por su intermedio a toda la Asamblea. El 80º periodo de sesiones no es un dato cualquiera. Es un espacio de un momento histórico que nos invita a detenernos y mirar hacia atrás para recordar por qué nació esta organización y se dio los resultados que la humanidad esperaba después de 2 guerras mundiales en las que la lucha por la riqueza y las áreas de influencia dejó millones de muertos, desplazados y heridos. Vivimos con una verdadera lacerante que pretendemos ignorar. En 8 décadas,
8
se han
decades,
desarrollado en el concierto de las
in
naciones
the concert of nations,
narrativas que,
we have seen the
usando
development of
la habilidad
narratives that,
de las potencias con larga
using the
experiencia en
skill
el
of the
derecho
great
internacional,
powers with long-standing
han
experience in
camuflado
international
heridas
community,
profundas
have
y
camouflaged
recuerdos
deep wounds
desgarradores de la
and
humanidad,
the devastating memories of
empleando
humanity. They've done so
inteligentes cuerpos
using
normativos
smart
que predican el
normative
deber
texts
ser
that
de las Naciones Unidas,
pretend
registrados en
to be
costosos
the
materiales
duty of the United
impresos y
Nations
audiovisuales,
through
que son poco
audiovisuals
efectivos
and others that are
ante problemas
not very
flagrantes
effective in
como el
light of in
neocolonialismo
facing
en todas sus
flagrant problems such as
expresiones,
neocolonialism in all of
ocupación
its expressions,
territorial,
territorial
genocidio, injerencia
occupation,
política, económica y
economic,
cultural,
political and cultural
el racismo,
interference,
la
racism,
discriminación, el
discrimination,
armamentismo y
the
la
arms
violencia que
race,
lleva
and
implícito,
violence
sin
which
contar otros
is
aspectos
implicit in all of
como el
this,
hambre,
without taking
la
into
crisis
account other
climática,
aspects such as hunger,
energética,
climate
alimentaria
change, the food
y las cada vez
crisis,
más
and
frecuentes crisis
the
financieras.
increasingly frequent economic
Los efectos de
crises.
esta realidad son
The
claros:
effects of these realities are
confrontación
clear to
y
all.
discursos que promueven el
Confrontations and
odio
discourse that
y la
promotes
división entre
hatred
naciones
and division
hermanas,
between kindred
inequidad,
states,
exclusión,
inequality,
pobreza
exclusion,
y
poverty,
desigualdades e
and
injusticia
inequality and
producidas aún
injustice,
en instituciones
still
creadas
produced within
para resguardar
institutions that
los
were
derechos de
created
los
to
más débiles.
protect the rights of the
Ya ni
weakest.
hablar de los
And we're not
derechos
even
económicos,
talking about
sociales y
economic,
culturales de los
social, and the
pueblos,
cultural
y más
rights
si se
of
tratan
people,
de los
and
pueblos
even more
indígenas.
if you look at the rights of
Una
indigenous peoples.
evaluación sincera
A sincere
nos lleva a confirmar
assessment
que
leads
a
us to
80 años
confirm that
los resultados
in 80
no son los
years
esperados. Por
we have not met
consiguiente,
the
no
expected
estamos
results.
bien.
Consequently, we are not in a
El
good
mundo
position.
actualmente
The
está
world
igual de dividido y confrontado
remains
más que hace
divided
80 años
and
atrás.
confronted against
En el
itself
mundo
more than 80 years ago.
existe mayor
Today
inequidad
in
en
the
la
world, there is
distribución de la
greater
riqueza
inequality
que hace
in
80
the
años atrás.
distribution of wealth than there was 80
Las
years
cifras de
ago.
pobreza,
The poverty figures,
desigualdad e injusticia,
inequality
en
and
lugar de
injustice,
reducirse, cada
rather
vez son
than being
mayores.
curbed, is on the
El riesgo
increase.
de que la paz
The
que aún
risk
exista
that
desaparezca
any
y que
remaining
una
peace
tercera
should
guerra
disappear
mundial
and the
de nuevo
third
tipo
world
enlute el
war
planeta
would
es muy
overtake
cercano
the entire
si no
planet is
reaccionamos a
very
tiempo.
close if we don't react in time.
El peligro
The danger here
de que el irrefrenable
is
desarrollo de las
that
fuerzas productivas en el
the
capitalismo, con
unstoppable
un mal empleo de la
force of
inteligencia
capitalism
artificial,
with the misuse of artificial
incremente la
intelligence
crisis
would
climática,
increase the
liquide al
climate
planeta y
change,
convierta a la inmensa
would
mayoría de la
liquidate the
población
planet, and would
en
convert the
innecesaria,
immense majority of the
es
population
también
into
algo
unnecessary
no muy
beings,
lejano.
is also something that we
No
can't
estamos bien.
completely rule out. We're not in a good
La
place.
ONU se erigió
The UN
sobre
was established
las
on the
osamentas que entre el
basis
50 y
of
70
the
millones de vidas que
foundations
perecieron en el
of the
Holocausto
skeletons
y la
of
destrucción de
the
naciones que
the
quedaron en
Holocaust
ruinas,
and
no solo físicas,
the
sino también
not only
morales,
physical but also
debido a la
moral
violencia que aplicó
ruins
el
left
fascismo,
by the
pero también
fascist
el naciente
racism and
imperialismo con el
also
uso de dos
increasing
bombas
neocolonialism
atómicas.
with the use of 2 atomic
Uno de
bombs.
los objetivos
One of
con que nació las
the
Naciones
goals
Unidas
that gave rise
fue
to
no
the
repetir la
United
barbarie
Nations
de la
was
guerra.
to not repeat the
Hoy
barbarity of
suenan
war.
los ecos
Today
de
we
tambores de
hear the
guerra en
echoes
todos
of the
los
drums of
continentes.
war on all
Se practica el
continents.
genocidio
We
por la
see the
sola
practice
decisión
of
de dos
genocide on
países,
the sole decision of 2
de negarle
countries.
el derecho a ser libre y
We
soberano a un
deny the
pueblo.
right to be free
Se
and
usan
sovereign
armas
to a
sofisticadas
people.
en clara señal de
Sovereign,
provocación contra un país soberano y se
sophisticated weapons are
impulsa
used against a
una
sovereign
mayor
country, and
militarización de una
increasing
región con la
militarization is being
doble
promoted
moral
within a
de la
region
lucha contra
with
las drogas.
double standards
Y en esa
in
misma región
combating the
se
war
mantiene
on
un
drugs.
criminal bloque
And at the
contra un
same
pueblo
time,
y
we
su
maintain
Estado
a criminal
por el
blockade
solo hecho de
against
haber
its
conquistado
people and
su
the
plena
state
independencia
for the
hace
sole
más de
crime of
6
having
décadas.
claimed its own independence more than 6 decades
Las
ago.
guerras no son las mismas de hace 80
are
años.
not the same as we had 80
Las guerras
years
ahora
ago.
son
Wars now are
multidimensionales,
multidimensional.
articulando mecanismos de
They
guerra económica,
use
financiera,
economic,
mediática,
financial,
información,
media, information,
cibernética, sin dejar
cyber,
de aplicarse
warfare,
la guerra propiamente militar,
without
que
even
ahora
taking
abarca
into
también
account
a la
military
guerra
warfare,
desde el
which now
espacio, la guerra
encompasses
biológica y otras
biological
técnicas
warfare,
que se
war
siguen
from
desarrollando
space, and other technologies that
impunemente en
continue to
base
be
a una
developed with
tecnología de la
impunity
guerra.
on the basis of technology of war.
No será una novedad encontrarnos con guerras climáticas
It
energéticas
would be
que
nothing
impacten
new
sobre
to
la
have
soberanía y
climate
seguridad
wars that would have an
alimentaria,
impact on
poniendo también en
sovereignty
riesgo
and food
recursos
security,
estratégicos como el agua.
jeopardizing strategic
Se
resources
está
such
poniendo
as
en riesgo
water. We
la
are
supervivencia del
putting
ser
at
humano
risk the
sobre la
very
tierra
survival of
y
the
de la
human
misma
race
de la
on
vida misma
Earth and
sobre el
of
planeta.
life itself on the planet.
Es hora de quitar la máscara al
Just
origen de
taking
esta
off
suma
the
de
mask
tragedias.
from
La
all
causa
of these
de esta
tragedies,
lógica
we can
destructora
see
no es
that
otra
the
que el
cause
dominio
of all
salvaje
of
del
this
sistema
is
capitalista que
the
coloca
wild
a la
capitalist
acumulación,
system
la
that
ganancia y el lucro de
places
pocos
the
sobre los
greed of the
derechos y la
few
vida de
over
las
the
mayorías
rights
planetarias.
and lives of the majority on the
La
planet.
causa
The
es
cause
el actual
of this
desarrollo
is the
capitalista
current
que trata de
capitalist
resolver su
development
crisis
which tries
irresuelta,
to resolve its own
retornando a
crisis
las formas
and ends
originarias de
up returning
acumulación
to the original
y
forms of
revirtiendo la tendencia
accumulation
decreciente de la tasa de
and
ganancia.
increasing
El
rates of
capitalismo, en su fase
profit.
imperialista, está
Capitalism and its
recurriendo de
imperialist
nuevo
face
al
is once
despliegue de la
again
violencia,
using the
el
deployment of
saqueo
violence,
de los recursos naturales,
plundering
al
natural
asalto de
resources
los estados
from
soberanos y al
sovereign
derramamiento
states
de sangre
and
para
the
cumplir con las dos lógicas de acumulación con las que
bloodletting
nació, el
to
poder político y militar
lead
de una
to
parte
the
y el
political
control
and
territorial de
economic
otra.
power and take that away from another.
Y se suma una tercera
Added to
causa
that, we have a third cause of the
más
current
inmediata
wars, which is more
y es el
immediate.
obsesivo afán
That is
de la
the
nueva
obsessive
administración de Trump de
zeal of the new
devolverle a los
Trump
Estados Unidos su
administration to
condición
give the
de
United
hegemón
States back
a
its
una costa de
position
poner
as a
en tela de
hegemonic
juicio
power
el propio
at
sistema
the
liberal,
cost of
el
the
llamado libre
liberal
comercio, la
system,
globalización
free
y de
trade,
ocasionar dolor y
globalization,
muerte.
and to cause
¿Para qué?
pain and death. Why? For what?
Para apropiarse de los recursos
To
naturales,
take ownership over natural
tomar el
resources,
control de las
to
materias
take
primas para
control
beneficio de
over
una burguesía
commodities for the
imperial
benefit of an
y
imperialist
subordinar
system,
a
and
la
to
mayor parte de los
subordinate the
países a
majority
su sed
of
insaciable
countries
de riqueza
for
y
their
privilegio
insatiable
y para
thirst
tratar de
for
mantener
privilege
un
and
orden
wealth, and to
unipolar
try to
a toda
maintain
costa.
a unipolar or
La
order at
reciente
any cost.
publicación de la Estrategia
The
de
recent
Defensa Nacional de
publication of
Estados Unidos
the
de
US
Norteamérica
Strategic Defense
plantea
Policy
un repliegue de sus tropas en
sets
el
out
mundo
a
para
deployment of its
sentarlas en su
troops around the
país
world
y área
to
de influencia.
in
Canadá,
its
Alaska, el
areas
Caribe,
of
Centro y
influence,
Sudamérica.
Canada,
La
Central and
experiencia
South America,
histórica con
among
nuestros
others.
vecinos
The recent
nos hace
history
concebir
with our
que esa no
neighbors
es
has
otra
made us
cosa que una
realize
nueva
this is
forma de
nothing else
aplicar
but a new
el
way of
monroísmo,
implementing
doctrina que
Monroeism,
vuelve a
which was a
plantear
doctrine
que
which
América es de los
said that
norteamericanos,
America is for the North Americans,
generando condiciones para un nuevo momento
generating
de
conditions for a
neocolonialismo.
new era of neocolonialism.
Señora Presidente,
Madam President,
estimados y estimados jefes de Estado,
distinguished heads of state and government,
desde el Aviala, nombre indígena del continente americano y
from
del
the
Caribe,
indigenous name for
nos
Latin America and the
declaramos zona de
Caribbean, we
paz
can say that we
en
are
la
a
segunda
zone of
cumbre de la
peace, and we
CELAC
did so
en
at the second
2014 en La
summit
Habana.
of CELAC in
Las
Havana
naciones de
in
nuestra región
2014. The nations in our
cumplimos
region
ese mandato que nos
are
autoimpusimos,
complying with this mandate that we
aún
set
teniendo en
ourselves,
cuenta nuestras
still
diferencias
bearing in mind our
ideológico-políticas
political and
en
ideological
varios temas y
differences on
respecto
various
de problemas no
nation-based
resueltos.
disputes that
Podemos
remain
decir,
ongoing. We
invirtiendo la
can
ecuación
say
de los estrategas del Pentágono,
when
que
we
es la paz
invert
y
the
no la
equation of
guerra
the Pentagon, that
lo
it
que
is
guía
peace
nuestras
rather than
relaciones
war that
internacionales.
guides our international relations.
A la impronta de esa declaración,
In hearing
desde
this
2022,
declaration
en este mismo lugar,
statement, in
he
2022,
venido
in the
haciendo
same
un
place,
llamado a las
I
Naciones
came
Unidas
to appeal
para
to
que
the
una
United
asamblea general
Nations for
como
a
la que nos cobija
General Assembly
declare al
to
mundo
declare
como
to
territorio de
the
paz.
world that it would be an entire
Han pasado
territory of peace.
11 años
And 11
desde aquella
years have
histórica declaración
passed
de la
since
CELAC
that historic
y 3 años
declaration of
desde desde ese
CELAC,
periodo
and
que
3
hice en esta
years
asamblea, y
since
no
I
solo
made that
que no
statement
hemos
in this
declarado al
assembly.
mundo como zona de
Not
paz,
only have we not declared the
sino que
world
enfrentamos
as a zone of
la
peace.
dura
Rather,
realidad
we are
de ver
facing the
cómo la
harsh
muerte en el
reality of
sello
seeing
que se va
how
usando con normalidad en
death
las
is becoming
relaciones
increasingly
internacionales.
normalized in international
También
relations.
sentimos la amenaza
We
del
also
fascismo
feel the
en
threat
cualquiera de
of
sus variantes
fascism
para
in
explotar
all
y
of its
dominar
variants to
a
try
los
to
pueblos
exploit and
en la hora
dominate
presente.
peoples at the current
La
time.
amenaza de muerte
The threat of
acecha América Latina
death has
y el
made
Caribe.
is
La quinta
covering
flota
Latin America and
norteamericana, dependiente
and the
del Comando
Caribbean.
Sur, está movilizada
We
con un potencial bélico
are
que
seeing
contempla desde
a
lanchas
bellicose
patrulleras
potential
hasta misiles,
which would even
pasando
go
por
so
aviones,
far as to
helicópteros
use
y submarinos,
missiles,
usando el
submarines,
pretexto
helicopters,
de que
using
ese
the
espacio
pretext
marítimo
that this
está siendo
maritime
utilizado
space is
contra la
being
seguridad
used
nacional
against
de los
the
Estados
national
Unidos,
security
a
of the
partir de la
United
introducción
States
ilegal
through
de
the
cocaína por
illegal
parte de bandas
introduction
criminales
of
pertenecientes
cocaine
a
through
carteles de
illegal
drogas.
gangs belonging to drug
Más
cartels.
allá de violaciones de derechos
Beyond
internacionales,
violations of
esta
international
acción
law,
provocadora
this
del
provocative
imperialismo
action
tiene dos
of
intenciones.
imperialism has two intentions.
Primero,
First,
la intervención sobre nuestra hermana República
to
Bolivariana de
intervene
Venezuela,
into our
que desde
kindred Bolivarian Republic of
1999
Venezuela that since
levanta en alto las banderas de la
1999 has
independencia
been raising
efectiva,
high
la
the
libertad de su
flags of
pueblo
the
y la
flags of the
soberanía de
freedom
su
of its
Estado,
people and the
y
sovereignty
que
of its
posee
state,
importantísimos
and
recursos
which possesses
naturales,
considerable
especialmente
natural
petróleo,
resources,
que
particularly
desde el
in
norte se
oil,
pretende controlar
which
y
the
apropiar.
North wishes to appropriate
Segundo,
and claim. Secondly,
intentar reconquistar
to
el
try to
control de América Latina y el Caribe sobre la
the
base
Latin
de
America
minar
and
la
the Caribbean on the
democracia
basis of
liberal,
undermining
impulsar la
liberal
militarización
democracy, to
y emplear
impose
otras prácticas
militarization, and
colonialistas
to use
que
other
debemos llamar
colonialist
por su nombre.
practices that we should call out.
El imperialismo
Imperialism
dice que interviene para luchar contra el tráfico
is
de
said
drogas y combatir el crimen
to
organizado,
be used to
lo cual
combat
es una
drugs
falacia,
trafficking. This is a fallacy,
pues si fuera verdad,
because if this
empezaría
were
a enfrentar
true,
efectivamente
would
ambos hechos dentro de su propio
it
país,
would actually be taking effect
donde la demanda de
within
consumo de
their
todo
own
tipo de
country,
drogas
where
es
the
alta
demand for
y en
this type
ascenso,
of drugs is
y donde se
high,
plasman distintas modalidades de crimen organizado.
where in its origins, where
Lo
we
que en
see
realidad
different
pretende
types of
Estados
organized
Unidos
crime. What the United States
es
is
darle
trying
a
to
nuestra
do
región
is to give our
el papel
region
de dique de
the
contención
role
a la
of
edificación de un mundo
holding back
multipolar
the
y
edification
sometido
of a
a sus
multipolar
intereses.
world and to submit it to
A
its
estas
own
acciones
interests.
militares,
Added to these
cuyas
military
imágenes se han visto
actions,
en todo el
the
mundo,
images of which have been seen
se
around the
suman otro
world,
tipo de
we
acciones
see other types
devastadoras
of
como las
devastating
orientadas
actions,
a
such as
endurecer
those
el bloqueo
aimed at
económico contra Cuba.
strengthening the economic
Ya
blockade
son
against Cuba.
miles de millones de dólares que Estados
Billions
Unidos le
of
debe al Estado
dollars
cubano
are owed by the
por
United
los
States to
efectos de
the
estas
Cuban
unilaterales
state
medidas
due to
y
these
que se explican por
unilateral
el rechazo
coercive
del
measures, which
imperialismo
are
a la
explained on the
primera revolución
basis of
socialista de la región que
rejecting
no ha
the
sido
first
ni será destruida.
communist revolution, which will never
La
be
amenaza de la
destroyed.
muerte
The threat
también
of
recorre
death
Oriente Medio.
is also afflicting the
En
Middle
el
East.
Oriente Medio,
In the Middle East,
el dolor de millones de
the pain
familias
of
por la muerte
millions
de
of
decenas
families
de miles de palestinos
and the
a manos
death
del
of
poderoso ejército
hundreds
israelita
of thousands
no encuentra
of
consuelo ni se detiene.
Palestinians
Toda esta violencia
finds
cuenta,
no consolation. All of
hay que
this
decirlo,
history
con el
tells
apoyo
us
incondicional de los
has
Estados
the
Unidos,
unconditional support
que
of the
quiere
United
acelerar
States,
el
which wants
desplazamiento
to
del pueblo
speed up the
palestino
displacement
en
of
el
the
menor tiempo
Palestinian
posible.
people as quickly as
La
possible.
paz será una palabra vacía
Peace will be
mientras
an
el pueblo
empty
palestino
world while
siga
the
siendo sometido a
the
prácticas de
Palestinian
genocidio
people
y no
continues to
cuente
face
con
practices
territorio
of genocide
propio
and does
y
not have its
soberanía
own
plena con
land and
Jerusalén
full sovereignty
como
with
su
East
capital.
Jerusalem as its capital.
Pero en esta región,
But in this region,
eso no es lo único que ocurre.
that's not the only thing that's happening.
La frágil estabilidad
The
política y
fragile
geopolítica
political